speaker for the workshop. Patty is not here, so Verena, if you are ready, then perhaps you could share your screen and you can begin. To talk about our first topic, that will be bioinformatics education and training in LMICS, low middle income countries. So please, the floor is yours, Verena.
Thank you very much. I just want to confirm whether you are seeing my shared presentation, if you're seeing my
Yes, we are.
browser.
We are looking
Yes.
at your presentation slide, and you're audible.
Great. Okay, great. So unfortunately, Patricia could not be here today. So I'm hoping that she joins a little bit later on in the session, because she does have some really valuable insight to add to this presentation. But I will go and kick off and just get started on explaining some of the activities that we currently have underway with regards to training in lower to middle income countries. And then, of course, to just chat about some of those activities and how it is possible for the broader community to get involved and contribute. So one of the first things that I'm actually going to ask you to do is to complete something. I hope that it's going to be okay that I ask you to do this. But essentially, you are going to enter a little word that sums up what you think about when you think about bioinformatics training in lower to middle income countries. And what I'm just quickly going to do is I just want to stop sharing my screen for 1 second and paste that link into the chat box. You don't have to do it right now. You can do it as the sort of presentation progresses, but it's a nice little interactive opportunity. And we will look at your responses a little bit later on in the session and see what comes to mind when you think about bioinformatics and training in lower to middle income countries. And hopefully it's not too negative. We hope it's positive. But if it is negative, we'll chat about why it's negative. So I would like to ask that you click on the link. I've just put it in the chat box, and you just enter 1 or 2 words that comes to mind, like I said, when you think about training in lower to middle income countries, and especially bioinformatics training. Are they good words? Are they bad words? Are they challenging words? Are they inspiring words? So we want you to put down a couple of words, and we'll look at what those words are at the end of the session. But just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we had planned to do with the session, we are going to explain to you what we mean or refer to when we talk about lower to middle income countries. So what context are we referring to this in? We're going to talk about some of the bioinformatics training activities that are currently taking place around the world and around the globe, and then introduce a couple of the consortiums and societies that currently deliver bioinformatics training, specifically focusing on those societies or consortiums that exist within Latin America and Africa, because Patty and I had a lot of familiarity with that. And then we were going to introduce to you just very quickly some of the initiatives that are ongoing at the moment within our networks and across the world to improve bioinformatics capacity, and especially improve the bioinformatics capacity within lower to middle income countries. And we're going to tell you how you can actually get involved in a couple of those activities should you be interested, because we do want to expand the views, we do want to expand the information, our examples, our case studies, to be more inclusive of our other societies and initiatives around the world and our other regions. So without going into too much detail, because I think this can be a little bit contrived and subjective as well, and sometimes these thresholds are not truly reflective of what's actually happening within a particular country, but essentially, when we look at the World Bank definition of what a lower to middle income country is, it's essentially any country with a GNI between about $1,036 and $4,000. So if you fall within this GNI, you are considered a lower to middle income country. Low income would be a GNI of basically below $1,000, which is actually really, really low. And essentially, we have roughly 135 lower to middle income countries as compared to 83 higher income countries. And you can see the distribution of these countries around the world. Now, we wanted to sort of just reiterate that all countries require some form of life sciences. And with the data that's currently being generated across the world and the volumes of that data, we would sort of propose that all countries actually do need bioinformatics support and training. And there are quite a number of initiatives that have been sort of going on around the world. And so there's been lots of training initiatives, been lots of capacity building initiatives, and there have been lots of consortiums actually that have been sort of put together, built, started, developed in order to address a lot of these gaps in knowledge and understanding, and of course in training. And so one of the things that I think is very important is that we do try to improve bioinformatics capacity in all lower to middle income countries, in all countries in general, but I think we do need to have a bit of a special focus on lower to middle income countries and try to think about, unique approaches, unique mechanisms to help them because they don't experience the same issues and problems that typical higher income countries experience. And we wanted to also just get across that there are a lot of collaborative efforts. There are a lot of open science initiatives. There's a push towards open data. But despite all of these new initiatives, training in lower to middle income countries is still a challenge. And we want to talk about why it's still a challenge and what we can do to reduce some of these challenges or to mitigate some of these challenges. And then what Patty also did was just to put a few of those challenges up on this slide in this little image over here, which are things like language barriers, reluctance of PIs, of course, to change, fear of bioinformatics, which we discussed actually just now in the beginning of the session, resources and infrastructure, of course, is always a major, major hiccup, and it's a big problem, and we will work on trying to resolve some of that. But then, of course, there's also a shortage of training in undergraduate programs, particularly, and especially for bioinformatics. I mean, in the region where I am, I think there's only one university that offers any kind of bioinformatics training at an undergraduate level. It's all offered at a postgraduate level, and that's very problematic because often, undergraduates would have already been on a certain trajectory, and then it's very difficult for them to sometimes switch into something that to them seems very abstract, although it might not necessarily be. So it's about thinking about how we overcome some of these challenges, how we work together as a community, how we reach out to each other and build stronger networks to leverage, to then overcome some of these challenges and some of these hindrances to bioinformatics. Now, I think the main thing that Patty kind of wanted to get across with this slide was that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we do often need to make adjustments. And making adjustments, especially for lower to middle income countries, is very important. There are lots of, I think, in my opinion, special considerations when it comes to training in lower to middle income countries that you necessarily might not even think of when you're training in a higher income country. So I feel like whenever I've attended training in a higher income country, something as simple as internet was never a problem. The internet was extremely stable. The bandwidth was really good. The up speeds and down speeds was really fantastic. And then whenever I've attended, not whenever, but many times when I've attended training in Africa, you'll be right in the middle of a session and the internet will just cut out. And it'll be out for like an hour to 2 hours. And then it'll come back. But then what do you do for those 2 hours if you're in the middle of a really intense training? What do you do if you're in the middle of data intensive training? So those kinds of challenges need to be thought of well ahead of time whenever training in lower to middle income countries. But the challenges are not necessarily exclusive to lower to middle income countries. I just think that you need to be very mindful of a lot of these challenges, even at the point of designing training, so that you already have contingency plans and you know what you're going to do if things go wrong. And so that is what a lot of the session with Patty and I was going to be about, is just talking about those challenges, getting information, and just looking at how some organizations have already started to mitigate them with unique training models or training approaches. And that's where we were going to sort of bring in a lot of the experiences of Cabana and HCB Bionet. The main thing we wanted to show with this slide was not actually where consortiums or bioinformatics societies exist. The main thing we wanted to show with this slide was how little we know about the consortia and societies that do exist across the world. These are not all of the consortia we particularly know about, but these are a couple of the sort of more larger consortia that we know of in lower to middle income countries, but they are by no means all. And when we were thinking about this, it became very difficult to find information about what consortia exist, where they exist, who forms part of that consortia. So if you are situated in a LMIC and you want to reach out to a group or a particular organization who you might have experience training and who you'd like to leverage off of or get some ideas from, or maybe even join forces with, that becomes very difficult if you don't even know what exists within your region. So one of the first things I think that we really need to do is begin to form registries of consortia per region, but also who exists within that consortia and their skills or expertise, if they are willing to share, of course. I think that would be very valuable to especially newcomers who are trying to set up training and deliver training, especially for the first time. Personal experiences, it's just invaluable in this sense. And when you don't have someone to bounce ideas off of, someone to chat to who's done this before, it is very likely that you're going to find it very, very difficult to deliver really good quality training. And so that was the main thing we wanted to bring across with this. And so I'm just going to very quickly hand over to Kath to just talk to the Latin American approach and Cabana a little bit, because I'm not too familiar with Cabana. And so Kath, would you mind just doing a quick overview of Cabana?
Not at all. I'd be delighted. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All good. Okay. Yes. So Cabana is a capacity strengthening project in Latin America, which we started in October 2017. It's funded by an organisation called the Global Challenges Research Fund, which is part of the UK aid budget in the UK. And it's a consortium of 9 Latin American research performing organisations or universities, plus EBI. And its goal is to address the slow implementation of data-driven biology in the region. There is tremendous wealth of extremely well-educated bioscientists and formal scientists in Latin America. And yet somehow or other, they are not managing to engage fully in these large projects of global importance. Things like the Earth Biogenome Project, the 100,000 genomes and its successor. These kinds of large global projects, there's often a massive underrepresentation of scientists from Latin America, and also there's often an underrepresentation of scientists from Africa and Asia as well. And so this is an attempt to do something about that in Latin America, and I'm sure Verena is going to tell you a little bit about H3A Bionet as well, and so that that is a kind of parallel and longer standing initiative to address similar problems in Africa. And so we base our activities around 3 challenge areas, all of which are very relevant to the region. The first of those is communicable disease, which of course is all at the top of our agenda at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic. The second one is sustainable food production, and the third challenge is protection of biodiversity. And we are attempting to improve the capacity to do bioinformatics in these application areas through, well, initially it was 4 activities, but actually we've extended to a 5th activity now. Right at the heart of this are the research secondments. So we've had secondees either visiting the EBI or visiting one of the other partner institutes in the network for up to 6 months, sometimes a little bit longer, and embedding themselves in a research group and doing data-driven biology related to one of these challenge areas. And that has been tremendously powerful. While our research secondees are with us, we also equip them to become excellent trainers in bioinformatics. So we run train the trainer activities with them, and we also involve them in delivering train the trainer workshops so that they can do this when they go back home. And so that way we increase the capacity to teach bioinformatics in the region. We've got quite an ambitious program of short courses. And so throughout the project, I think our aim was to run about 30 short courses across the region. And again, we've been able to involve our research secondees in delivering that training. And so, you know, the secondees have really become one of the key deliverers of the entire project. And then finally, we're developing a sustainable e-learning platform with content that can be used by bioinformatics trainers going forward. And all of this is underpinned by a few very important principles. Open science, so all of the outputs from the project are being made openly available. Inclusivity, so we're thinking here about gender, we're thinking about minority groups, we're thinking about how we reach out to the more remote regions and involve them proactively in our activities. And then career-wide involvement. So with bioinformatics, you know, there's a large body of molecular life scientists and others who are more on the application end, people working in national reference labs, looking at surveillance of disease, for example, or conservation managers working in the field, who need to use bioinformatics but are not necessarily trained in it. And so we feel it's very, very important not just to reach early stage researchers, but to reach out across the entire career spectrum. So hopefully that's given you a flavour for what we're doing, and I'm very happy to answer questions about Cabana later on.
Thanks a lot for that, Kath. I think it was a really, really wonderful overview of Cabana. And hopefully they get a feel for sort of the breadth of the work that Cabana does. And so there was another slide, but I think you've pretty much summed up everything, to be honest. you've covered a lot of this, so I'll skip this for now and just go into HCA Bionet a little bit. So HCA Bionet is a Pan-African bioinformatics network, and the main and the sole mandate of HCA Bionet is to just enhance bioinformatics capacity in Africa. And they do that via a range of mechanisms. At the moment, we have about 28 partners. We have one US partner, which is the University of Illinois. And we've reduced a couple of nodes from the onset of HCA Bionet, at which point we had about 32 partners. So we have 28 partners scattered across Africa, which I think was, HCA Bionet was really sort of the first consortium of its kind in Africa. And so the buy-in was really great in the beginning. Everybody wanted to be a part of HCA Bionet because of what it could bring to their countries and their organizations. And so we had wonderful, you know, universities, organizations, consortia joining HCA Bionet right in the beginning. I must note that there was a sort of informal bioinformatics network within Africa, but what HCA Bionet did was they formalized this network. They got everybody to synergize, work together, and they did a really great job of connecting people all over Africa and getting them to actually work on similar projects together. And in that way, there was a lot of transfer of skills, a lot of training that just happened naturally and inherently in a lot of projects. And what they also did was roll out a lot of infrastructure. So they really spent a lot of time, money, and effort in improving the actual infrastructure on the ground. So improving data storage, improving computer equipment, infrastructure, sending and buying servers and getting all that infrastructure built up. But then the issue then became is we were rolling out all this infrastructure, but then the skills were not there to use it. And so then a lot of this got underpinned by training. And so some of what HA Bionet offers is computer and networking infrastructure. They do data management support. They have lots of data analysis tools and workflows that they build themselves and they create. And then data storage, submission, and access is a big one for HA Bionet because we work with African data. A lot of the data is very sensitive. And so we've developed a whole range of initiatives around how to access this data, protecting the data that needs to be protected. We've built archiving facilities, data storage facilities, cold storage facilities to ensure that, one, the data is protected, but also that the data remains accessible. I think a big issue with Africa is that oftentimes researchers do work here and they get the data, they collect, biospecimens, they collect samples, they collect DNA, but then everything gets taken off continent. And then the data also exists off continent. It often gets submitted to repositories that's off continent and that African researchers actually often don't even have access to. And so that was one of the key things that I think HA Bionet did, was to keep that data on the continent, keep it accessible to African researchers, of course within reason, and with a lot of restrictions as needed, but then still submitting the data to public repositories so that it's available to the more global network. But a lot of this requires a lot of expertise, it requires a lot of technical skills. And so training has always been something that we put a lot of effort into. And so we've done a lot of training in the past. We do face-to-face workshops, we do a train the trainer series, HA Bionet train the trainer series. We have a number of internships that we offer throughout the year. We do live online training, we do hackathons and jamborees, and we also try to make our training materials as accessible as possible. So what we do is that any training we do is created under Creative Commons license, and we work under the principles of open educational resources. So we feel that whenever we deliver any training or any other organization delivers training to our partners, we have a strict requirement that the materials are open and accessible. And this includes data sets, scripts, code. So we harp on making things accessible. That's a huge objective and a huge goal. And in order to make things accessible, we very quickly realized that there was this large disparity between countries, even within Africa. Some countries had a lot more than other countries. And so when we wanted to design courses or trainings or workshops, it became very, very challenging because it was often a situation where we'd have to go to a country or an organization or a university physically and deliver the workshop, or they'd have to be flown to South Africa oftentimes, and we do the training and the workshop in-house. But that has a lot of challenges. It's very expensive. In Africa, getting a visa, even for Africans to travel within Africa, getting a visa is a lengthy process. It's difficult. Sometimes, if a Ghanaian is coming, for example, to South Africa, I think the visa process is about 3 months. That's really, really ridiculous. And if you're trying to organize a quick training that's maybe really needed and it's important and it's urgent, that just doesn't work. So we really needed to start to think about how do we adapt all of these models to make it work in an African context. And one of the key things that we started to do was to start to do these blended learning approaches, where we'd have classrooms where participants would come together face-to-face, interact with a TA, a systems administrator that was on the ground, but then still be part of this online community. And then within this online community, they'd be part of an online learning platform where they could interact with us remotely, with the trainers on the course, with other students on the course, with PIs and whoever was involved in the course at that point of time. So we had an online learning component blended with a face-to-face learning component, blended with open educational resources, so that they could actually have the resources available to them once the course ends. one thing that our trainees always express a lot of disdain in is that oftentimes these amazing workshops get delivered, but they get delivered using virtual machines. And once the virtual machine spins down, that sort of software and infrastructure in a sense is gone. And so they really struggled with having access to resources and materials post-training. And they really struggled with being able to actually analyze data in real time and in the real world once the training ends, because then a lot of the time the infrastructure ends as well. And so that was one of the key challenges, I think, in terms of training that HA Bionet really needed to overcome. And what we decided to do very recently is actually to opt to design training containers. And so what we do is we have a bunch of classrooms apply to be hosts for one of our courses. Those classrooms then have to pull our training container, they install it locally, they manage it locally. We then run the training, and they have to manage the participants, manage access. They basically run the training independently. And then what we do via this training then is give them the capacity and experience and confidence to then run the analysis on their own once the training ends. When HA Bionet now ends the training and we move away, the container is still there, the materials are still there, and provided that they've installed and managed the container appropriately, the container is available. They can then update tools as they need, dependencies as they need, but they can also rerun the training independently of us because we've created it under a Creative Commons license. So that means they can actually just take the training and rerun it. We are completely fine with that. And we allow for that. And we actually explicitly ask people to do that. As long as HCA Bionet is cited, we really do not have any kind of issue. And it's through mechanisms and approaches like that that I think Africa has really started to sort of become a dark horse in the bioinformatics world, I think. And it's really just down to working together. And I think HCA Bionet is really a sort of a beacon of what can happen when people work together and they get funding. Because a lot of these things were not happening before then. So, okay, I got very passionate there. I'm going to just pull back a little bit now and just talk to some of the initiatives that we've started very recently to support others that may be wanting to deliver bioinformatics training in particularly low resource settings. So one of the first things that we got started very, very recently is a 10 Simple Rules manuscript, which is led by Ben Moore, which we are trying to prepare to publish early next year, which is basically just going to be 10 simple rules to deliver bioinformatics training in lower to middle income countries. And it will harp on a lot of our experiences. It's very much the experiences of everybody involved in the paper, what's worked and what hasn't worked, and just sort of drawing, in a sense, a couple of best practices from that, that we can give in terms of guidance and information and experiences to anybody who may be interested in that. But then once we started working on this document, we realized that we had a lot more information than should probably be in that document. There's a lot more experience. There are many more mechanisms available and that are being used out there. There are a lot of more tools. There are a lot more, guides and instructions and best practices in general that exist somewhere out there. And a lot of us had a lot of experience. We had templates, we had case studies, we had implementations of bioinformatics training in low resource settings. And so we thought it might be really great for us to put all of that into one place, into one document, summarizing all of our experiences, what we suggest to be, sort of broad best practices for a variety of categories within training. And so we started to work on this document, and we very quickly realized that this could be a living document in a sense. And I'm going to talk to how many of you could possibly get involved in that activity. But this became it became a much larger exercise than we initially anticipated. And it seems to be evolving a little bit as we go, which is great. And we realized very quickly that we did not have many people working on the document, for example, from the Asia Pacific region. And so our experiences were very sort of either Latin American specific or Africa specific. And so we really need a broader, sort of more inclusive approach with this document. And so if any of you on this call right now, or if any of you know of people who might be interested in providing some of the experiences or some of the challenges even within these regions, so that we can think about how to modify this document to make it work for you as well, that would be really great. If any of you are willing to maybe provide some of your own case studies or scenarios that you've come into or run into, that would also be really great, because it would help us structure the document in such a way that it's really useful and impactful for a really broad and large community. And so if anyone is interested in that, I'm happy to pass my email along. You can always get in touch with me personally if you'd like to contribute to that exercise and join a couple of the meetings. It's an ongoing document, and we envision it to be a live document that will keep growing indefinitely, possibly. But we are still talking about that. There's still some discussion around that. And so, yeah, so this was essentially just to say that there's an open call to people from other regions who are interested to maybe get involved in some of these efforts. We would like to very much perhaps start a registry per region of at least consortiums or organizations that do deliver bioinformatics training, so that we have a broader understanding of what's happening within these regions and where those groups are, whether those groups exist. It will give us a good understanding of the kind of efforts, and it will help us synergize. I think if we can see that perhaps there's another group who's, you know, just a city away doing the exact same work we are doing, we can synergize. And in that way, we can build capacity together, and I think we can help each other improve a lot. So that is essentially the entirety of my presentation. I hope I didn't take up too much time. I was honestly not timing myself just now. But now at the end of the presentation, I was actually thinking we could take a look at any of the words that you might have entered at the beginning of the presentation. So I'm going to see whether this worked. And I'm going to share it. It did work, so that's actually pretty intense. That's crazy. This is so cool. So this is what you guys said comes to mind when you think of bioinformatics training. You think about resourcefulness, you think it's sunny, that's an odd one. Exchange, challenging, much needed. It's a rainbow, I like that one. Finance, infrastructure, quality of teaching, cross-cultural awareness, that's a really good one. Opportunities, there are funding issues coming up a lot. Generic or specific topic. Verena looks pretty, okay, I don't know who said that.
That was nice. That was nice.
Diversity. So this is great. So I was thinking maybe there'd be lots of negative words here, but there are actually many, many positive words. So that's really exciting. I think that's amazing. I'm really glad that you all also partook in this exercise, because it would been very sad if I pulled this up and we were looking at a blank screen. So that's great. It's nice to see that everybody's thinking in the right direction. So that's great. So I'm going to end there. I hope I didn't take up too much time and that I didn't bore anybody too much. I was speaking a little bit fast, just trying to get through the presentation. But yeah, I think if we do have a few minutes, I am happy to take a couple of questions, but I'll leave that up to the moderators. Maybe we take questions at the end, I'm not sure.
Thank you so much, Verena, for that talk. I personally felt that, this is spot on. Most of us are from the LMICs, and various challenges that we face is very similar. And I'm so thankful for the experience that you share with all of us. And of course, in our midst, we have participants also from our LMICs. And I believe that, while we are still in this topic, perhaps we can open up for question rather than bring all the questions until the end, which I'm not sure whether everybody is going to be able to stay on. So I think I'm just going to open up the floor for any questions or even any comments. So let me check. Yep, you will be able to unmute yourself. So I think, if Verena, if you're all right, I think we can probably get some questions from the floor.
Sure, no problem.
Cool. So is there any questions from the floor or any comments?
Yes.
Sure. Thank you, Harpreet. Go
Excellent
ahead.
presentation, Varana, and I think it's really good to know about this initiative. Excellent initiative. And since I work in a women's college, and although we have gained some resources, but still we are lack of many of the resources. I think the type of workshops, the blended learning type of workshop that can work very well in our setup. So can you tell me what is the procedure for getting in touch with you people, and is there any requirements we have to meet if we want to be part of such workshop?
Thanks for that question, Arpit. So it's actually pretty simple. Everything we do at the moment is done free of charge. And so if you are able to meet very, very basic requirements, depending on the course that you're interested in, we usually just tend to accept you if you're willing to take on the task of obviously coordinating the classroom. For our introduction to bioinformatics classroom, the requirements and the specs are very, very low. So essentially you just need a stable internet connection, and you need to maybe be able to install something like Cygwin if you don't have access to an Ubuntu terminal, and that will carry you right through the course. And usually we have a formal application process, but provided you meet some basic criteria, we typically accept everyone. I think for your region, the only thing that might be a little bit difficult are time zones, because we do meet a couple of times a week when the course is running. But that can be mitigated. We've moved to a couple of online models this year, which we're going to actually try and use should classrooms want to join us from different regions. And we'll see how that goes. But in terms of the materials, I must also point out that a lot of them are accessible via our website. We put everything up there, it's free. A lot of information is also accessible via our website. And I'll just put the URL to our website into the chat box very quickly, because on our website, we actually have a help desk. The help desk is free and open to anybody and everybody. And so if you have any questions around training and you'd like to get some more specifics, you can log a ticket over there and I'll pick that up. But the bioinformatics help desk is actually open to anybody for any kinds of bioinformatics queries, free of charge, and we have to respond. We are required to respond. They track us. And so if you have any kinds of questions, you are welcome to pop that in there. If you're looking for specific materials that you think we might have, you're welcome to ask and we'll send that to you. I'm also busy with a curation exercise at the moment. So we are trying to apply bioschemas to all of our training materials. And so hopefully our materials will be picked up by a lot more scrapers on the web and hopefully exist in a lot more repositories. But hopefully also just make them all more findable in general. So a lot of what we do, we're trying to really make available and give just open access to. So hopefully in the next month or two, we'll kick off a lot more of those initiatives too. But what I will also do is I'm actually just going to put my email address in the chat box. You are really welcome to get in touch with me directly as well. I really don't mind.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Harpreet.
Thank you, Verena. Thank you.
Thank you, Verena. So, yeah, just now, Verena, you mentioned about, putting ourselves in a map. So, speaking from AP Bionet perspective, yes, we are determined to put ourselves in the map as well. So, of course, representing Asia Pacific, we would like to, be involved as well in education. So, yep, I think we will definitely be in contact after this.
That's great. That would really be wonderful. I think it would really be great to get some first-hand experience from your region as well, because maybe the challenges you face are a little bit different to the challenges we face or the challenges in Latin America, and that would be great to know as well.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, Kath, I see that you raised your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to raise awareness of another opportunity. Verena introduced the Bioinformatics Summit, Bioinformatics Education Summit, which we've done twice now. The first time we did it was in South Africa, in Cape Town, face-to-face. This year it should have been in Hingston in the UK, but because of lockdown, we did it remotely. Next year, it's going to be jointly hosted by GOBLET and Cabana, and it's more than likely going to be virtual again. And we are, again, very, very keen to involve people from the Asia Pacific region. The first iteration of this summit was very focused on, there was a very strong representation from across Africa and a few people from around the world. The second one was, we managed to retain the African commitment. a good chunk of Europe and a little bit of Latin America, but again, we didn't have many representatives from Asia Pacific. And so, although a good representation from Australia, I think we had 4 or 5 participants from Australia. So we really want to make sure we've got global participation for the next one. So if any of you are interested in participating in that summit, we're going to be hopefully announcing a date within the next few weeks. And I'll pop my email in the chat as well. And if you could let me know, then we'll make sure that you're on the announcement list and get you involved. It's very much a working meeting. You will be strongly encouraged to participate in the kind of activities that Verena has just described. We produce a lot of documentation, and there's a lot of discussion. It's low on presentation and big on discussion and production of stuff that we can then all use, and it's a lot of fun. So we hope to see some of you there next year.
Sure, thank you so much, and note taken, because I started attending GOBLET AGM meetings and stuff like that about a year or 2 ago, since last year at InCoB in Jakarta, and of course this year here. So that's truly amazing how much that I have learned from you guys, and you guys are really fantastic, in sharing your experience with all of us. We do have a question from Romato. Her question is there any standard curriculum of bioinformatics for undergraduate and masters, either from AP Bana or even any other bioinformatics society? We actually we have an upcoming talk on this. So Ibu Emma, if you can stay on for a while, we have allocated this, and we know that this is actually a need. And so Dr. Seti, you also mentioned that UCAM offers undergraduate programs. So yeah, in Malaysia specifically, there are a few universities who actually offer formal programs at undergraduate, postgraduate. Myself, I'm from Perdana University. We also have postgraduate programs, and we also have trainings, and there are a lot more that everyone is actually doing. So yes, we hang on to that, hold your horse. So we're going to go to that section about formal programs, and how any standards or anything. So if we do not have any more further question, thank you, Verena. Thank you so much for that. Now I'd like to invite our second speaker, Kath, and as Kath will be speaking to us about ISCB perspective. Yep, it will be ISCB Competency Framework. What is it and what can it be done? So the floor is yours, Kat. And for others, Russell, thank you. You just joined in. Good morning to you. And for others, if you have any question, just pose it in the chat box. I think because all of us are here at any time, we could just answer to that. So the floor is yours, Kat. You are still muted, Kat? Yep.
I'm still doing that. All these months on, I'm still doing that. Hopefully you can all see my screen now.
Yep, perfect.
Great. I'll just see if I can move this. Let's see if I can move that out of the way. There we go. All right. So I'm actually hoping that my talk will partially address the last question. So I'm going to tell you about the ISCB Competency Framework, what it is, and most importantly, what it can be used for. I'm going to try and get through this reasonably quickly so that you can actually start using it when we go into the breakout session later, and also just so that we can catch a little bit of time up. But this is an initiative that was started by the ISCB, but has actually involved a large number of different organizations and consortia. And our main mechanism for progressing with these activities has been either through ISCB meetings or through the Bioinformatics Education Summit that I just mentioned earlier. And so these were the participants sort of helping to coordinate last year's Bioinformatics Education Summit, and it would be great to see AP Bionet in here as well next year. Okay, so what is the ISCB Competency Framework? Basically, it's a minimum information standard which defines the competencies that are required and the levels that they're required at for bioinformatics professionals. And it's also a tool to support bioinformatics educators to develop courses and curricula that meet the needs of their graduates' potential employers. So it's there to support educators, and it's also there to support individuals. Just to step back a little bit, I wanted to explain to you what we mean by competency. A competency is an observable ability of any professional, and it integrates multiple components. And we think of competency in terms of the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes that you need to display a particular competency. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. We like to use competency to define what people need to learn, because acquisition of competency can be validated objectively, and also because it's applicable to learning of all types and at all career stages. So this is something that you can carry with you and build upon throughout a long and hopefully esteemed career. We apply the competency concept to different types of bioinformatics professional, and I just wanted to give you a flavour for what we mean when we say bioinformatics professional. I'm not just talking about the hardcore geeks who do bioinformatics here. I'm talking about anybody who makes use of biological data. And so we broadly divide our types of bioinformatics professional into the users of bioinformatics, the scientists who interact with bioinformatics, and the engineers who are often the ones who are developing the bioinformatics services and tools that these other groups use. And so we might be talking about anybody from a physician or a genetics counselor, or potentially an agronomist or a conservation manager, through to the kinds of folks that we've mostly got online today, who may be molecular life science researchers who've come to bioinformatics from biology, core facilities managers who support bioinformatics research, and then the engineers who develop the bioinformatics infrastructure that we use and who develop the tools that we use. And so the framework is built with all these different types of professional in mind, and is cognizant of the fact that they need different competency sets and to different levels of competency. So what can the framework be used for? I mentioned that this is good for educators, and it's also good for employers and their staff. And the reason why I said that is that educators can use it to assess and redesign either complete degree programs or shorter learning interventions. You can use it to figure out, are all the areas that are considered by the ISCB incorporated into your degree program? If not, what's missing? And we're actually going to have a go at that in the breakout later. You can use it to create supplements to an existing program. So let's say you have developed a program that really focuses on the scientist. Well, you might be able to develop a series of modules that are more aimed at the user or more aimed at the engineer, for example. And that might broaden the scope of your degree program. You can use it to develop short training interventions, learning interventions outside the context of a specific degree program. I'm based at the European Bioinformatics Institute, and the kind of training that we deliver and develop is all in this sphere, actually. probably the longest learning intervention that we provide is a week long. And many of the things that we do are considerably shorter than that. So it's just as good for developing that kind of training as it is for lengthier qualifications-based activities. And the framework can also be used as the basis for new competency frameworks that have a computational biology element, but also contain additional essential competencies not covered by the ISCB framework. So there's a huge and growing interest in data science as a discipline now, and there are competency frameworks being developed around data science. And so there'll be an overlap in the competency requirements needed by a bioinformatician and a data scientist. And so one of the things that we're hoping to do in the future actually is to do a systematic study of how these two things overlap. And so perhaps we could bring more data scientists into the bioinformatics sphere, which we were discussing at the very beginning of the session. So most of my talk is based around this, but I also just wanted to mention that we mustn't forget that the framework can also be used as a career planning tool for individuals. You can use it to guide your own self-learning, to identify appropriate formal learning opportunities. And you can also use it as an employer. If you're building a team of bioinformatics professionals, you can use it to support the recruitment and the professional development of team members. And thinking about what competencies they require, and then how they might accumulate further competencies as they work through their career with you. Okay, so why does the ISCB even care about competency? Well, actually, the question that was asked just before this session really speaks to this. This entire activity at the ISCB was essentially born out of frustration, because principal investigators and core facility managers were having real trouble hiring bioinformaticians with the skills that they needed. And so they set up a task force within the ISCB to look at job descriptions, to look at existing bioinformatics courses, and to look at the activities going on in bioinformatics core facilities, and work out what skills are needed in the bioinformatics profession, and where the educational gaps were, because they were finding that people coming out of undergraduate and master's courses at the time had a subset of the required skills, but they weren't the whole piece, and they didn't have all of the skills required. And so this kind of started back in the late 90s, where Russ Altman, who has been engaged with the ISCB for many years, articulated this need. And the task force then created a survey and built a pilot curriculum around the results of that survey. But then we hit a bottleneck, and that bottleneck was, how do you compare existing curricula with the ISCB pilot? And so a huge amount of work was put into screen scraping, essentially going and looking at master's curricula and the few undergraduate curricula that existed at the time, and trying to figure out how they compared with this model curriculum. But there simply wasn't enough information out there. You know, that if you look at a list of modules and it says things like Bioinformatics 101, but you have no idea what's in that Bioinformatics 101 and what its intended outcomes are. And at that point, we had a bit of a eureka moment, and we thought, well, rather than capturing what the trainees, or what the trainers rather, or what the learning professionals want to put into a course, why don't we capture what the trainees need to get out of the course and not worry too much about the inputs? And at that point, we got our heads together and we developed version 1 of the framework, and there's a paper published on this. I'll pop the links to the papers in the chat later. I've been rather negligent and I've not actually put them in the presentation, I'm afraid. So basically the idea behind all of this is that there are lots of routes to the same destination, and it doesn't really matter where you start from, so long as you get there in the end. And so we kind of flipped our strategy to rather than trying to fit everybody into a standard curriculum, saying, well, these are the things that you need to get out of your curriculum in the end, and you can develop your curriculum in whatever way you like, so long as it meets this particular set of competency requirements. So I just wanted to share with you what that original version looked like. We had 6 broad areas of competency, and I won't go through them in great detail, but you can see that they span from general understanding of biology through the more computational and formal science requirements, through to the professional conduct requirements, things like effective teamwork and willingness to engage in continuing professional development yourself. And so this is really speaking to where employers were hurting. These were the kinds of things that they were missing in the people that were coming out of graduate courses at the time. And so this list was able to inform educators and start thinking about how they build these things into their curricula without forcing them to stick to a particular curriculum itself. In that publication, we also had our first attempt at defining these different types of professional that I alluded to earlier. And so in the original paper, you would see that we had a classical bioinformatics user, a scientist, and an engineer, and we personified them. And this was to try and build empathy and enable people to see the kinds of professional that we wanted to develop using the competency framework. And we found that this strategy is really, really helpful, actually, because it helps educators and employers and individual professionals empathize with each other and understand each other. And so we're going to be doing more of this in the future and expanding it to different types of professional roles. And to tie this all together, we of course had our list of competencies, and we mapped that to what these different types of professional need. And in the first paper back in 2014, we did this in a very, very simplistic way. We didn't say anything about what level of competency was required by these different types of professional. And we simply said, either you need it or you don't. And since then, we've done an awful lot of refinement. But before I go into that refinement, I wanted to share with you how educators have then used the competency framework to shape their own curricula. And so I have shamelessly stolen something from Bruno here, and I hope he doesn't mind. And so I would like to thank him. It's probably slightly retrospectively, but this is one way in which you can map a full degree curriculum to a competency framework, and you could do this using any framework. It doesn't have to be the ISCB framework, but we've got our list of different competency areas here. And then we've got the modules in a degree program. I think in this case, it's the Bioinformatics Engineer program at the University of New South Wales. And what Bruno has done here is to basically look at the modules that already exist and figure out, does this module address the competency at all? does it address the competency, but it's not its main focus? So example here is that a programming course that also has a group project partially addresses the teamwork competency, although it's not the main objective of that module. And then he gives us a score of 2 if the competency is the focus of the course. So for example, a course on Python scripting addresses a scripting competency. And so this gives you a very, very quick and dirty, but also very useful picture of where the gaps are in your curriculum. And then you can start thinking about, well, where do I need to either develop new modules or incorporate new content into existing modules so that I have got full coverage of all of these competency areas. And so we're gonna have a go at doing something a little bit like this later on, but I wanted to just to put a bit of meaning in my words. I wanted to show you how this has actually been used in real life. So one of the challenges we had at this point was that these different types of professional need competencies to different levels of proficiency. And so at this point, we started to think about, well, how do we rate these levels? And we decided to use a taxonomy that's been used in education for many, many years, actually. I think Bloom first developed this back in the 1950s or 60s. I am not really, and I suppose I ought to call myself an education professional now, but it's not the background I come from. And so I had to learn all of this stuff retrospectively, as many of you will be doing now. So the taxonomy moves from knowledge through comprehension, understanding, to application of a competency. And then you start getting into really using that competency to do complex analyses, to synthesize component ideas and rearrange them and create something new. And then finally to evaluate and make judgments and perhaps also evaluate what other people have done. So this is the kind of scale of competency that we then built into the framework when we developed version 2. The other refinement that we put in here was we were finding that people had trouble with understanding what we meant by a bioinformatics user, a bioinformatics scientist, or a bioinformatics engineer. And so to inject some reality into this, we provided some information on these real roles that I alluded to earlier. So, you know, if you're a physician, we would put you in this user category, but what does that really mean? Which of these competencies are completely irrelevant to you? Which ones do you need to have at application level? Which ones do you just need to know a little bit about? And then, you know, the same if you're a discovery biologist, for example, or if you're an engineer. And so version 2 of the framework incorporated this grid. There were a few tweaks to the competencies themselves to bring them up to date and to incorporate things that we'd neglected a bit in the first iteration. But then there was also this richness in terms of the different types of professional we were addressing, and the different level, the different extents to which they needed a competency. And so, you know, at this point, we really hit another bottleneck, and the bottleneck was that people had sort of picked up on this, and we'd had some real trailblazers, and we've got many of them online with us today. I would count both Russell and Bruno as the trailblazers who used this in their own courses, and also H3A Bionet used it to develop their curriculum. And so they were the real early adopters of the framework, and they also articulated what the challenges with using it were. And all of those challenges have been fed into version 3, which we really just finished in May, June this year. And I'm happy to say we have finally got online in a public form just yesterday. We still haven't published the paper associated with this, and so some of the guidance around using it is I'm afraid to say is still not available. But the framework itself is now publicly available, and we'll be having a look at it later on. And so where we're trying to get to is happy course providers delivering quality training to happy learners who make competent employees who then either do or enable groundbreaking research with a positive impact on society. And when we've achieved that, I think we can all either go to bed or retire. We're definitely not there yet. It's going to take us some time yet, but we are definitely moving in the right direction. So I'm going to whiz very, very quickly through what we've done to develop version 3 of the framework. First of all, we've updated the competencies to incorporate competency in open science and in fair practices, and also artificial intelligence and machine learning, which of course are taking greater and greater center stage in bioinformatics. We've also worked a little bit harder on the professional conduct aspects of the competencies. We've made the mappings to related frameworks transparent. An awful lot of work has been going on in the competency field in many different arenas, and so where people have used the ISCB framework and where they've built on it, we've tried to make that clear, so that we can all better make use of each other's developments in this field and come to some kind of consensus set of standards. And a huge amount of the work in this new version is to put some flesh on the bones, to define the knowledge, the skills and attitudes associated with each of those broad competency areas. And so this really helps people to understand what we mean by those broad competencies as well. The attitudes have been delineated into effective attitudes and also ineffective attitudes, because we find if we show people how they shouldn't be behaving, it's also very, very helpful, and very, it's very illustrative. If you're doing a lot of things right, but there's also one or two things that you're doing wrong, so it helps you to kind of steer you to change your behavior. And then the other thing that really is new for version 3 is what I touched on at the very beginning of my talk, which is it is thinking about the competency framework as a minimal standard. So we consider an individual to be competent in an area if they display all of the knowledge, skills and effective attitudes that are associated with it at the Bloom's level for their role. So I'll make these slides available to you all, but the link to that full framework is there, and we will be using it in the breakout later on. Just to show you what we mean by knowledge, skills, effective attitudes and ineffective attitudes, this is an example. So for the first competency, competency A, is now work at depth in at least one technical area aligned with the life sciences. The knowledge is what you need to know to display that competency. This is not rocket science. So you need to know the central dogma. You need to know a little bit about core experimental platforms, data generating technologies in your chosen field. You need to be aware of the tools and databases relevant to that topic area. And you need to understand the experimental process and how the data piece fits into that experimental process. So that's the knowledge base that you need. There's then a set of skills that you need, and I won't run through all of these in the interest of time, but it's things like being able to differentiate between biological and non-biological entities, being able to relay biological information, being able to critique life science papers, plan and perform your experiments responsibly. And then the attitudinal things are around, being able to integrate other people's ideas, embracing collaboration, considering the impact of your research. So, you might be doing all of these things, but if you're narrow-minded about your field, or if you defend your discipline and don't think about how other disciplines touch on it, you're not really going to display this competency to the full. So this is where the ineffective attitudes and being explicit about the ineffective attitudes is going to help people to develop professionally. Another thing we've done is just the semantics, more consistent use of language. So I won't go into this in great detail, but we've just tidied this up so that for every competency, you could pop the phrase, a competent bioinformatics professional will at the beginning of it, and that sentence would make sense. And we've done the same for the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes. So how are we now applying this as a professional body within the International Society of Computational Biology? Well, there are two areas that we're developing. And both of these are again to enable learning professionals in the field to deliver what the research community needs. So the first of these, which Russell is spearheading, is the course endorsement process. And so this is a process whereby higher education institutes will be able to apply to the ISCB in the future and have their degree granting programs endorsed. And this will require demonstration that both the learning outcomes and the curriculum itself map to the competency framework, and do so in a fairly comprehensive way. So this is for longer qualifications-based courses. And then there's a separate affiliation process for shorter courses. So the kinds of things that the EBI and that Bioplatforms Australia and GOBLET do. So for providers of short bioinformatics courses, they'll be able to affiliate their courses with ISCB. There's a similar scheme available for conferences, and I think that InCoB is actually an ISCB affiliated conference. So it's kind of extending that concept, but also bringing the competency framework in. And so for affiliation, because we're dealing with smaller pieces of learning, you need to demonstrate that a course addresses at least one of ISCB's competency areas. Neither of these things are available yet, but by next year's InCoB conference, I hope we'll be able to say that they are. And then in terms of things that will be coming up in the next year, and if you come along to the Bioinformatics Education Summit next year, you'll be able to help us develop these things, or at least some of these things. There's the publication, which is progressing well, and we're hoping to get out as a preprint by the end of this year or beginning of next. There's the publication of the guidelines for using the framework, and importantly, real life use cases, like the Bruno case that I touched on earlier. Remapping the roles to the Bloom's levels, and reviewing how this works at the level of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Again, this work is in progress, but we haven't quite finished it yet. And then completely new pieces of work that we need to start, and that I think are going to be the focus of the summit meeting next year, providing guidance on the levels required at different career stages. So, thinking about someone coming in straight from a degree program versus someone with 5+ years of experience, and how those Bloom's levels apply at these different stages. And then extending our mappings to include other related frameworks. And I'm hoping that will also include the framework that Jessica is about to tell you more about. So with that, I'd just like to thank you and to thank the many, many people who've been involved in getting us to where we are today. I mentioned that the summit has been important in developing a lot of what we've done in the last couple of years, and these are just snapshots of all of the people who were involved in Cape Town back in 2019 and then virtually in May 2020. But there's also a long history, and I have not been able to acknowledge everybody here, so I do apologise if I've missed you off and you've been involved. And seek your forgiveness. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And if there's time, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you so much for that. So I think before we move on to a photo session, just a very quick photo session, I think we can have probably 1 or 2 questions. So I just want to check, is there any questions from the floor to Kat? You could unmute yourself and ask. Is there any question?
I have a few questions, but I can wait until the discussion point later on, and I think Kath and me and others will have a good discussion.
Sure, Jessica, I think that's a good idea. Harpreet,
I just have a question, Kat. This competency framework is online usable, or we can download it, downloadable version, or?
Yeah, so it's currently online and usable. What we have not managed to do yet is create an export function. So that's on our to-do list. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to download the entire thing into either a human readable or a machine readable CSV file or something similar. I'm hoping we'll be able to get that working probably in the first quarter of next year. So we're working in a sort of discontinuous set of sprints on a lot of this work, but it is publicly available, and I'll pop the URL in the chat. We'll also be using it in the breakout later.
Thank you. And Kate, I just want to request if you
alignments between us where we can actually help and boost each other, which I'm quite sure there exist. So let's see, can you see this? I hope.
Yes, all good.
All good, and then slow computer, and I will just remove myself and move you up and move this up, sorry. Soon. Why is this now? So I had the same problem as you, Kat, I think, with this moving things up. So hello, sorry, my name is Jessica, and I'm from Sweden. I'm part of Science for Labs laboratory, which is a kind of huge thing in Sweden, and part of the bioinformatics platform within that organization. And today I'm here to talk to you and hopefully also discuss the master rubric for bioinformatics. And as with the competences, we think the master rubric for bioinformatics is a current trend and a trend that we should embrace because it's more learner-centric, as Cass said. So this master rubric for bioinformatics is a teamwork, and it's a team of Rochelle and Terry and Allegra and myself. And it's quite international. Rochelle is a cognitive scientist from the States, and Terry is in England, and Allegra is in Italy, and me in Sweden. So let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to get it to work.
It's not moving.
It's not moving there. Sorry. So this is the outline of the talk. It would be around 20 minutes talk. And I will try to address the kind of common problems that we have when we develop courses or curriculum or training. Problems that we all face when we are there and trying to design. And I will then continue with to try to discuss and explain what is the master rubric for bioinformatics, how is it structured, and how can it help in all of this. And I will, since we heard about the competences prior to this talk, I will try to weave that in some way and see where, in my view, where we do align, where these two can be used as a complement to each other. So let's see what we can come up with. So Kat also talked about this, and this is at least to me, it's a problem, or it was a problem when I started. So I'm kind of interested in the higher educational sciences only since 2017. So I'm also a newbie in this area. And the striking thing when you enter a new field, independent of the field, is the kind of the jargon of that domain and that field, the talk and the words, etc. I just want to introduce some of the jargons that is used both in the competencies, but also here, and I guess that more or less spans over the educational sciences field. So you will be hearing such words like blooms that you heard from the competencies as well. It's a huge thing for us in the master rubric for bioinformatics. Journeyman, taxonomy, trajectory. So all of these things might be a bit kind of intimidating, or you don't know what it means, but bear with me. We will walk you through it, and you will get a hang of it. So what seems to be the problems? I mean, in Sweden, let me give an example. In Sweden, when you become a PhD, your institute or professor says, you know R, then you teach R. So in Sweden, we have 20% of our PhDs are on teaching. So you need to do 20% teaching in your PhD. Basically, it's 1 year, 4 year of PhD plus 1 year of teaching. And as a PhD student, most often you have no idea how to teach. So the problem, that could be one of the problems. You know an area of, you have an area of expertise that you know, and you are put to teach on that. Doesn't make a good teacher, maybe even on the contrary. So the common problems that we identified, and I think is common and others have identified as well, are the following. While designing a curriculum or a course, doesn't matter if it's a short form or if it's a whole semester curricula or a whole program, is that you need to identify the target audience. You need to specify the prerequisites. Are the prerequisites before prior entering this course or this program? You need to articulate the learning outcomes. And I will come back to this, but I say it already now, that articulating learning outcomes is absolutely the key for everything, because the learning outcomes, have you articulated those, drives the other process. If you articulate good learning outcomes, you can identify the target audience. And specifying the prerequisites. So learning outcome is the first thing after identifying the cases in your course or the course that you're given, that it needs to be articulated. You need to select in-class activities. We heard that from Verena, that, okay, depending on where you teach, what is the kind of infrastructure, all of these things you need to bear in mind when you design your teaching activity. You need to manage and plan your time. Is it a week's course? Is it a month's course, etc.? All of these things need to be balanced to how much you can teach and the learning outcomes that you have specified. You should assess learning both during the course but also after, and evaluate the teaching. So how well did you do? So all of these are problems that we all face when we design and build our courses and curricula. So what is then the master rubric for bioinformatics? Why is this close to my heart? Why do I think it's important? We believe that it is a tool to address common problems in course and curricula design. And I really want to stress that it's not that use the competencies or the master rubric for bioinformatics, because I really think that they complement each other and can be used in different ways and maybe at different levels or starting points in the process of designing. but let's discuss that later on. So what we believe is kind of the strength of the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics is that it is built on educational sciences. It is the synthesis of educational sciences. So on the top here, so Master Rubric I know it's a busy slide, so don't read everything. So the kind of take-home message for this slide is that top of that box is that you have a lot of educational science going into the Master Rubric. We really are leaning on evidence-based educational science research. We are leaning on the Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive behaviors. We are leaning on the MESIC, and we are leaning on the principle of adult learning. All this goes into the Master Rubric when we created that, and out comes the tool that can be used for different things here. So the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics allows instructors to directly create learner-centered experience. And here is somewhat what I want to, what I talked about in the beginning of the talk, that my professor just put it in my hands that you know R, therefore you teach R. It's very teacher-centric view of things. It just looking at me and what I can teach, but the Master Rubric as well as the competencies, and here's the trend shift, I think, that it's more learner-centric. So the learner is in focus of everything, which I think is really good. So what is a Master Rubric? The paper on the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics published in 2019, and looking in that paper, the Master Rubric is, I mean, it's intense, it's huge, it's overwhelming, and one can just feel that, okay, I don't want to read this, it's just too much. I want to de-dramatize that a bit and say that it's just in situation marks like that, or yeah, dubbelfluts in Swedish. It's just a table, it's just a 3D table that can help you in different ways. And on the left side, you have the knowledge, skills, and we call it abilities instead of the attitude, which the competencies have. And why the difference is that we believe that abilities is something you can measure, that is really, it has nothing to do with how you perceive things. It's not a behavior that you observe, it's something you can measure that with a metric in some sort. So we call it abilities. Otherwise, the knowledge is knowledge, and the skills are skills, just as Kat described. So you have the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities on the left. And on the top, you have the stages, which is the developmental trajectory, which leads from a less expert to a more expert, which is the late journeyman in the Bioinformatics Master Rubric. I will come in more to what these are, explicit two examples for those two. And then we have in the middle, in the cells, we have something that we call performance level descriptors, PLDs, and that describes the performance at any given stage for any given KSA. And here these took the longest time to write and longest time to discuss in the group of the four of us, and we were only four, and it took 2 years to just go to build this PLD in order to be sure that every PLD really had the correct Bloom's level in it. So the stages are from a low level Bloom's in the novice to a late advanced Bloom's level in the late journeyman. To have the correct verbs in the PLDs that are mirroring the Bloom's level of the verbs, etc. So this is kind of the structure of the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics, or any Master Rubric for that. So the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics consists of 12 knowledge, skills, and abilities. And one can, when looking at it in comparison to the competencies have more granularity than the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics. So the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics is more, it's overarching. And we believe that looking at these 12 KSAs, you quickly realize that it's the prerequisite knowledge of biology and prerequisite knowledge of computational methods that are more or less the bioinformatical part of the rubric. And under each of these biology and computational methods are a granularity beyond. It's like a gene ontology 3 or something like that, because the KSAs under each of these biology or computational method could be anything. It could be R in the computational method, it could in biology, it could be marine biology, and even further down that it's some plankton something or whatever. But anyway, the two first of the KSAs are what we are more is the core bioinformatics. One can argue maybe that the third one, the interdisciplinary integration, because you need to integrate biology and computational methods, could also be bioinformatics. However, it could also be data science in some sort or any other domain that that might have interdisciplinary integration. These 12 cases should be thought of when you build a curricula in our mind. So I really want to truly want to point to the communication and ethical practice that, at least in my experience and what I see around me anyway, these are two cases that most often, or sometimes quite often anyway, are forgotten about. And I think that the communication and ethical practice, at least the communication part, is something that could be a KSA that could be part of even short format course. And we should not forget about these really, really important KSAs. These are, of course, KSAs that are, like I said, independent of domain. So are you in science of social sciences or religious sciences, these KSAs are there as well, although with different performance level descriptors, of course. But the stages should be the same and the KSAs should be the same, but the level descriptor should then, of course, change. So coming to the stages, here is a slide with just examples, what we think of and mean when we say a novice. And you see in the description, for those of you that are familiar with the Bloom's level of taxonomy, that we see the in the lowest level of Bloom's, in the novice, you have remember and understand, all through then the late journeyman, which we think is a doctoral holder, a PI, a really truly independent researcher. And the description in that, what we are, this is creative, innovative, etc., that the lower levels of Bloom do not really have. One thing to point out is that you can be a late journeyman in a biology setting, but a novice in bioinformatics. So the trajectory development over the stage are not time dependent here, in the sense that it's not time dependent, but we want to point that these 12 cases should be part of a bioinformatics curricula if you have a program of some sort. Regarding the performance levels descriptor, this is just an example of the KSA of interpretation of results and output. And again, I forgot to highlight, but I want to point to that, for instance, for the apprentice stage, that you have verbs like recognize, etc., and understands, and that then mirrors the Bloom's level that apprentice stage is in. And there are, when Googling Bloom's taxonomy, for instance, you will get full catalogs of which kind of active verb goes to each level of the Bloom's taxonomy that you should use, that you should, like Kat also said, that the competencies will, and then you can use a verb in the competencies. And here is the same thing, learning outcomes, will provide learners with, and then you will have an active verb that both you and the learner, the trainer and the learner can measure, should be measurable. So we really believe that the master rubric for bioinformatics helps, and I hope to show you how this tool can be used to address common instructional problems, the 8 problems that I showed in the beginning. sadly, we have not come as far as the competencies that we have mapped this to. We don't really have any use cases, which we truly need, and this is the next stage, because without examples and use cases, it's quite hard to understand how a tool will work. It goes for any domain. So I think that was excellent for the competencies to do. It's really good. So coming back to the problems then, and these are on the left side, it's how the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics can help for curriculum build and how it can be used for a standalone course. And more or less, it's the same kind of mapping that the competencies talked about, that you, within your course or curriculum, that you find the KSA that goes with your course. So let's say it's a KSA for biology, and you nuance that to have a more specific KSA, but you can still map the course to the specific stage where the learners are. Maybe they step in at novice and then you want to take them to apprentice or something like that. So you can use the performance levels descriptor for the overarching KSA, but your KSA is more specific, and then to kind of write to ensure content coverage and managing planning, etc. So different parts of the rubric can help in this different for the different common problems. I want to really kind of, again, this with articulating learning outcomes. We had a paper that is, I think it's in SOS archives. I have the reference in the last slide. Can also post it in the chat. Where we identify the learning outcomes as the driver of the whole process of the instructional 5 phases, which we talk about in that paper. But learning outcomes is a crucial step for designing either your whole curriculum or a standalone training course that I said. And here again, mapping your cases to the performance levels descriptor can then support realistic learning outcomes given the time and the prerequisite that you have at your hand. We all know that a standalone training course, if it's 1 week, has other kind of English word, challenges, let's say, than a curriculum, of course, and vice versa. So I just want to give you some examples, and these are examples from the GOBLET AGM workshop that the team had earlier this fall. And we had a course description like the ones you see in front of you, and we wanted to identify the knowledge, skills, and ability that was relevant in that course description. And for this particular example is the black ones that were identified to be corresponding knowledge, skills, abilities for that given course description. And the kind of more dark grayish here was something that they thought was, it might be, but it's not clear. So it's interesting how you can look at your own course description and then try to map it back to the master rubric in that sense. And then you also identify the stages in a course description in a similar way, that you see that for the KSAs that you have identified, or which level are the learners according to that course description, and that will then help you in the prerequisites. What do the learner needs to know prior coming to the course? So here's then the suggestion on how to use the Master Rubric for Bioinformatics, so that you should start with identifying the cases that you intend to target with the course. And again, the Master Rubric of Bioinformatics is a tool that is overarching the cases that we believe is part of a bioinformatics curricula for going from novice to a late journeyman to an independent. And this is in a research setting. So the rubric here is not, we have not thought about it to be someone out of the kind of academia sphere here, although it might be used there as well, but in the scope of what we have written is in the scientific area of the academia, or anywhere, but in the scientific academia stages and how you proceed that. And then you identify also the stages at which the KSAs need to exhibit it in the course. So I think this structure that the master rubric is built is that it's rigid in its way, that since it's overarching knowledge, skills, and abilities, and you yourself need to think about the granularity of each KSA, it's not a tool that will be updated all the time. It's there. However, you need to put the granularity. And here I think the competencies and the work that you do is very, very, very good because you present the Ivan and the Martha, etc. You have put yourself in those shoes. And there will be new learners. There will be new types of personas over the year, of course, because the field evolves. So also the education, of course, needs to evolve with that. And I think that that is really good work in that. Now I lost what I was going to say. It was something good about the competence, but I'll get to that. So anyway, we believe that it is a tool and it can be used to create consistency across courses. Something, if you have it in your whole curriculum, is consistency. Also in terms of learning paths, if you have short form courses that you want to have for PhD or something as a learning path, that you start with this course and you should go to that course. It's easy to follow them, that you know if it's written out there which stage and which case say the course is belonging to. You can follow that trajectory over the learning path. And we believe this is both for the learners as well as instructors. And I think if being started to use as well as with the competencies, it's something also for supervisors for PhD students, that they could really be aware of the trajectory development of their students. So just to finish off, that these are the people involved in the tool and in this work. And the references used in the talk, like I said, is the master rubric published paper, and then the guidelines for curriculum and course. I will put them in the chat as well for you if you like to see them. And please get in contact with any of us. I thought I had emails, but any of us, if you have any questions after this. Questions usually come after being at something. So thank you so much for listening, and I will stop sharing now.
Thank you, Jessica. So before we go to the next talk, I just want to check if there's any question from the floor. Alternatively, we can ask during the discussion, the joint discussion session, right? So thank you, Jessica, for that wonderful talk. Very, very informative. Next we have Russell. Yeah, Chele, can you please help to share? Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Russell Schwartz from Carnegie Mellon University, and I want to tell you about some current work going on under the auspices of the International Society for Computational Biology, in particular on efforts at course affiliation and degree program endorsement. So to tell you a bit about what we're doing here, I need to say a little about the history of how we got to this point. If you've seen some of the earlier talks in this session, maybe especially Kath Brooksbank's, you've probably seen a lot more detail on this than I'm going to go into here, but just in case anyone is just getting here for this talk, I wanted to say a little bit about how we got to this point and what we need to know to understand what we're doing here. Essentially, what we're doing comes from an effort to understand how to answer the question, how do we train people in computational biology, which has been an effort of many people working in the ISCB and through other organizations who have come together to try to ask this question in various forms. A lot of this work is documented in a series of publications from the ISCB's Curriculum Task Force, as well as the efforts of a couple of recent meetings, the Bioinformatics Education Summits, for which another one is in progress at the moment. And essentially, what this all came out of was an effort to try to understand better what we need to be teaching computational biology students and as well as practitioners and how to do this most effectively. This originally started with an effort to understand what the needs of the community were through a series of surveys. Some of these were to look at employers and try to figure out what employers, in particular core facility directors, and a survey of job ads advertising for computational biologists, felt was needed from trainees in this area. And these are just a few of the general categories that popped up, as well as many specific skills mentioned in these surveys. In addition, we had a survey of degree programs looking at well over 100 different degree programs at various levels in computational biology and bioinformatics, again, trying to ask the question, what do different people in the field who are teaching in this area think needs to be taught to a computational biology student? And again, coming up with some general categories as well as some more specific topics within those categories that various programs thought should be taught. And the hope behind this was that we would be able to put together a general idea of what it is that needs to be taught in this area and come up with some consensus that we could use to provide guidance to others in the field. The short conclusion that we came to from these early efforts, though, was that there really wasn't any consensus at this point. There seemed to be no agreement among degree programs about what needed to be taught, and no consensus between those teaching computational biology and those looking to employ computational biologists. We could provide some framework for understanding the space of programs and needs, but we felt it was premature to be prescriptive about best practices, and further that we needed to get more input and learn more from the community about what was being done and why there was so much variability among programs that were out there. Nonetheless, this led to a first effort to define what were called the core competencies. So this was discussed in some detail in an earlier talk in this session. And these are basically high-level categories for understanding the areas that seem to be needed for training in computational biology. So areas in which it was felt by various stakeholders in the community that some mastery was needed. These were also mapped to personas, which was how we started to get a handle on the question of why there was so much variability, essentially different profiles of people working in the field who might have different needs for what they needed to know. Now, unfortunately, that didn't quite bring us to a consensus yet. And we wanted to work more to understand what can we actually say to be able to be a bit more prescriptive and frankly helpful in the guidance we would be giving to the field. And that meant reaching out to a larger group of people, in large part by bringing more people into the effort to organize this kind of study, as well as conducting a large number of workshops at ISMB and various ISCB and GOBLET affiliated meetings to work through this competency framework, to get feedback on it, to refine the notion of how it works, and to get ideas about how it was used or could be used. And a result of this was a refined competency framework in which we came up with a better way of considering different levels of mastery that someone might need for these competencies, and expressed in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, as well as a broader set of personas to better capture variation across training needs and more experience on how these kinds of competencies were used to develop and evaluate programs. That let us come to a revised version of these competencies where we could talk about how a competency would map to different broader classifications of personas in terms of the Bloom's categories. And based on this, come up with a somewhat more useful idea of the competencies. This was further refined in the version 3.0 competencies just coming out now, which were a major focus of the Bioinformatics Education Summit meetings, where these were once again revised, where they were put in terms of what were called the knowledge, skills, and attributes of Bloom's taxonomy. And that allowed us to say in much finer detail what a competency really means in terms of what someone needs to know or be able to do, or how they would behave in order to exhibit a particular competency. That also led to a revised assignment of competencies to an expanded list of personas. And based on all of this, we were able to get to the version 3.0 competencies, which was really the point at which we felt it was possible to start talking in depth about what could be done in a curriculum and how you might design and evaluate a curriculum using this framework. This is an example of what a competency looks like in the current framework, described in terms of KSAs, so much more specific levels of detail we could use to let someone know whether they are exhibiting a competency or how you might assess whether that competency is exhibited. And what all of that meant is that we were now at a position to do something that we had felt was inadvisable when we first started, and that is to give clearer guidance to people working in the field about what constitutes good practice. What is the best practice? What is the consensus of the field on that? We feel we now have a much clearer idea of the range of teaching practice, in particular the range of personas and competencies that help us understand why it was so hard to get a consensus in our initial studies, and how we can come to an idea of what's really needed and what the agreement is in the field on that. That gives us a better way of balancing generality and specificity. So we have a notion of competencies that is both general enough to capture a wide range of personas, but also not so general that we can't do anything productive with it. And we now have many examples of how these are used in teaching, design, development, and assessment that let us figure out how to put these into practice. At the same time, in many of these meetings where we were working on refining our notion of how to teach in this area, we were hearing more and more about interest from practitioners in receiving this kind of guidance, as well as being able to get some sort of stamp of approval that what they're doing is sound with respect to what they've been learning. So some way of saying, if you offer a short course or a degree program, that what you are doing is consistent with the best practices of the field and with the understanding of experts in this area of how we should teach that area. As a result of that, it was decided that the ISCB was now in a position to be able to offer two evaluation mechanisms to the community. A process for course evaluation, in which people who are offering short courses, so courses that might involve hours to days of instruction on a single relatively focused topic, could have these assessed by a particular body of experts, in particular organized through the ISCB, approved and then affiliated with the ISCB to be able to say, this is a course that the ISCB agrees is being taught in a rigorous way on a topic that's appropriate to our field. Likewise, we felt it was time to be able to offer a degree endorsement process, so a process by which people offering degrees in computational biology or bioinformatics can again go to the ISCB as the primary professional society in our field and have their program evaluated and get a stamp of approval in the form of an ISCB endorsement saying that we agree that this is a rigorous program. So the ISCB Board of Directors approved this earlier this year, and we've been working since then to get a practice in place by which we can make these mechanisms something that's actually in place in the field and available to our community. This is not finished yet, which is why this is a progress report, but I want to tell you a bit about what we're doing and what we hope will soon be available here. So first of all, I need to say a little bit about why you should do this, or why we think someone might want to do this. So why affiliate a short course with the ISCB? To a large degree, the advantage from someone with a short course is to get the approval of the ISCB, so recognition that this is a rigorous course and that it meets some of our competency criteria, but also at the same time to get the ISCB's auspices to help advertise this course. So to be able to bring this out to the ISCB community as something that we say the community might be interested in through a variety of mechanisms. The ISCB's community, in turn, would benefit from that in terms of getting a library of these approved courses that all of our members, as well as others in the community, could take advantage of, as well as a statement of encouragement from the ISCB that we hope would get a critical mass to these courses and maybe encourage others to get involved in ISCB or other courses of this kind offered by it. Degree programs, we can offer a similar argument. Endorsement is intended primarily to be a process by which someone who's offering a degree can get the ISCB's approval that this is a degree program that we feel is rigorous, that it meets our standards, and in particular meets our expectations based on all of this work, trying to understand the range of practices in the field in terms of how we think it is appropriate to teach people of various personas and at various levels in the field. So an endorsed degree program would get, again, advertising through ISCB, a certificate that would certify this has been through an ISCB review process. And the ISCB, again, would get a library of these courses. We are saying that there would be a nominal application fee. This is not intended to be a money-making thing for the ISCB, but is something that we hope will limit courses to those who are relatively serious about having their courses endorsed, as well as giving the ISCB access to even more examples of practice in the field that we who are working with the ISCB education community can use to continue to refine our understanding of what teaching practice is or should be in the area. So where this stands right now is that mechanisms have been approved for this. This has been approved by the ISCB to go forward. We have processes designed that we are putting in place, and we're currently setting up application forms for people who actually want to enter one of these applications and put it into our review process. So this is kind of a snapshot of what the web application is intended to look like, and it would involve ways of giving various information about your program. What I'm showing here is a draft in progress of the short course version of this form, where you would give information about who is organizing the course, basic information about what kind of course is being offered, what it teaches, how it's being delivered, as well as various certifications that show that it complies with ISCB rules. For example, that it's aligned with the ISCB Code of Conduct on issues such as inclusiveness of the community. There's a similar process for the degree programs, similar form that is going to be set up there. But I'm leaving out one very important process of both forms, and that is really the most involved part of entering such an application, which is working through the competency framework to provide us the information we would need to see that the course is meeting a set of objectives that are consistent with standards of the field by working through the competency framework. So the idea, in this case, I'm showing this with respect to the degree program version of this, is that you could take a set of learning objectives that describe what you propose someone would learn by taking your degree program, by getting your degree, and you would be able to map these to the competencies in terms of Bloom's hierarchy. So to be able to say which of your objectives match to which competencies at which levels of mastery, and from there get an idea of the competencies someone would need to exhibit to meet your learning objectives, and show the mapping in the other direction that these competencies are provided by the degree program that you're seeking to have endorsed here. You could then take that further and map that degree profile to a persona. So you could take the mastery of computational biology competencies that you have said your program provides and that we have verified that your degree program is going to train someone to meet, and then say, how does this meet personas that we understand to exist in the field? This could be any of a set of existing personas where we've already done these mappings, things like a bioinformatics software engineer, a core facility director. It may be a superset of these, but something that's telling us, and people who are looking into our endorsed programs, what it is that your program is meant to teach, who it's meant to serve. And this may indeed be novel personas. So it may be that you want to show that your degree profile maps to personas that we don't know about yet, that might be important needs, maybe emerging needs of the field that we can then incorporate into our understanding of the range of professions of computational biologists or people who need computational biology training to further refine our process as we go forward in these studies. Now, for each of these mechanisms, there is a review process. This is a draft of the review process. This hasn't actually been run for any program yet, but this is how it's intended to work. And I want to walk people relatively quickly through how that is intended to work. This is the degree program version of it. It would be a somewhat lighter weight process for the short course version, but essentially it's modeled on how we would do a review of another scholarly work like a journal article. Essentially, people would use the application system I described to submit a program, provide evidence of its credibility and rigor, and this would be put through an initial screen, some automated, some by the people working on this system, and then credible applications would be put through a full review by a journal-like review committee. So the equivalent of an editor would review the program, assign it to a set of reviewers from what we hope will be a growing pool of trusted reviewers who have experience in this area. And there might be multiple rounds of review and revision in which the reviewers of that degree program or that short course go through the course, provide a summary of what they believe are the strengths of it, where they believe it needs revision, provide that to the people offering the course, and potentially go through multiple rounds before we either reach a decision of rejection or movement to phase 2 of the review process, at which we've agreed this is a course or a degree program that is rigorous by the standards of the field, and move on to due diligence. So due diligence would be a process by which we certify that this is a real program. The program exists, the necessary facilities and resources to offer it exist. And at the end of this, we can certify that the program is either rejected or it's accepted, or it goes to some remediation plan by which people can refine it for further improvement. At the end, it would be endorsed for what we are proposing would be 5 years, unless there's some major changes in the program, and then it would be up for renewal after 5 years, during which time it would get advertisement from the ISCB, acknowledgement from the ISCB, and ability to use ISCB as its endorsement. So this is basically the process and where it stands at the moment. The websites and associated databases are in process to be developed, and after those are completed, we hope to recruit and train a first panel of reviewers, as well as seek some pilot courses and programs from our communities to put through the full review process. We'll then conduct a phased opening to the broader community, and then through this, hopefully grow over time to meet the demand of the community, expanding our library of courses, as well as our pool of qualified reviewers, often coming from directors of these courses and degree programs, so that we can continue to offer this indefinitely as a service to the community. So I just want to close by acknowledging many who have contributed to what I've described here. This was a long time effort of many, starting with the ISCB, beginning with Fran Lewitter and Lonnie Welch, and continuing with others such as Seth Mulholland, who's putting together the web resources, Diane Kovacs, and the ISCB Board of Directors, and various others who have helped us get this process in place and provide good feedback on it. The work of the Bioinformatics Education Summit, which is too many individual people for me to name, but is an effort of a number of different groups involved in bioinformatics education, founded by Nikki Mulder, as well as the efforts through EMBL and EBI of Kath Brooksbank's team there to work with their resources involved with working with the Competency Framework to put together the computational tools and databases we need to make this work. And finally, thanks to many participants of workshops, surveys, summits, and online discussions over the years who have brought us to the point where we believe this is something useful and valuable that we can offer to the community. And thank you to all of you for your attention.
Thank you, Russell, for the talk. Thank you so much. All right, we are grateful. Russell, you're also here. Is Russell still here? I thought I saw him in a while. Yeah. All right. So it's good that now that we can break for discussion. So if you have any question for Russell, this is the great time. So I'm gonna pass this time to Bruno. Yes, Jessica.
Yeah, I have a question for Russell and the whole team in case you fall asleep soon, because I guess it's it's very odd hours for you. So how do you plan to deal with if they're coming in new things? Like just 5 years ago, we were not maybe aware of the FAIR principles in training. And all of these things, if they come new things all the time, how is one to deal with those in the endorsement setting? I'm thinking more.
Well, I see this as a process that's evolving along with the knowledge and the experience of the community. So this is being integrated and first rolled out with the version 3 competencies, for example, but it's being designed in a way that as the competencies are updated, this process will be able to update with them. And it also relies on expert reviewers who we're expecting will be keeping up with the state of the art of the field. So in those ways, we hope it grows and develops as our knowledge of how to teach computational biology grows and develops.
And you will not kind of, but what is called? So let's say that you you accept my course today, but in 2 years' time you have evolved. Am I punished then that, okay, now I need to go back and also do these things because otherwise you are not part of the it's not part of the quality stamp?
For the degree programs, at least, the plan is 5 years. I actually don't recall if it was the same for short courses, but we wouldn't suddenly cancel an endorsement midterm because something new would come up in the field. But at the next 5-year renewal, if you wanted it renewed, we might expect then that you bring it up to date with how standards have changed.
No, but that's good. So, but could you? And this is just a tip or something. Could you, if I'm not aware, if I'm a bioinformatics trainer, so I'm not really aware of the education or the bioinformatics field in that way, would you send out kind of a newsletter? Now, this is now the new thing. This is what we will. Give me a heads up that these are things we now expect. This is interesting. Please try to incorporate this in your training or whatever.
I'm not sure this program would have its own newsletter. We would expect people working in this area to keep up to date with what's coming out in the field of bioinformatics education, but then the review process itself would be a way this could be communicated. We would see this as a process hopefully helpful to people offering degrees or short courses, that they would have expert reviewers who would evaluate what they've done and would be able to bring them up to speed if there's something new in the field they might not be aware of, and provide helpful suggestions for how to improve as part of the review process.
I'm thinking more not the specific kind of knowledge in that sense in bioinformatics, maybe more infrastructure-wise, or like I don't know, open access, how to, that it's important, data management. I have no idea what it could be, but something that usually a researcher is not really thinking of because it's not in their field of view directly. It's rather the educational sciences field that keeps maybe things time. No, but it's really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, Jessica, I think this is something that probably the ISCB Education Committee needs to think about as well, because this could be a really useful service to the community, even independent of the endorsement process. A regular newsletter informing about,
I would like that. I mean, really, because one can't keep track of everything. So.
No, I totally agree, and we have the ISCB Education Cozy, which absolutely anybody can join. You don't have to be an ISCB member to join it. So that could be a very, very useful forum for allowing these emerging things to bubble up. I mean, as you've seen, the framework itself is a living thing. It's constantly evolving to take into account these changes to the field. But we felt it would be a little bit unfair to ask people to endorse their courses on an annual basis, say, or on...
Oh yeah, definitely. That I understand. 5 years is good. It's just that just the thinking of just over the past 5 years, it's happened a lot, I think, in my view of things, and roles and personas or whatever. I mean, for you, it's hard just to keep up with that, I guess. New things and new kind of integration between roles. And for instance, I expect, maybe in the other countries, you can, if it's so, that I expect that in the future, medical doctors will be with different types of medical doctors, because there will be a lot more of AI in the medical field as well. Physicians with that competency or with that kind of thing, which today is under physicians, but maybe tomorrow will be called something else. So another persona.
If I could add one more idea there. A few years ago, education became a regular item at ISMB, and that's one of the places we hope to bring the latest of the field to the field every year, is the ISMB Education Cozy Session. We'd love to see people submitting strong material every year. We'd love to see more proceedings papers on education. We get very few submissions for that. So I hope people who are advancing the field are aware of that, as well as other forums like the Bioinformatics Education Summits, where you can bring the latest material to the community.
My hope for the future is that it actually will be a new role for people like us here, that it's a new kind of career path or academic title for people that are in educational sciences, together with something of team science. So team science meaning domains that are not pure, bioinformatics, for instance, being computational and biology. And it could be other things. Data science is also team science based. So a more professional title for the unicorns, knowing everything about everything.
So may I add something? And I think this endorsing the courses and degree program is an excellent idea. And only one thing that worry me, that is very fastly evolving fields, and people particularly working in some remote areas, the countries where the bioinformatics is just taking off right now. So it's very difficult to meet the global competencies. So can we have some model curriculum from ISCB which people can follow, and that can be updated regularly, so that we can every time compare how our curriculum align with the model curriculum, and that can be an alert for us also to make changes required time to time.
Kath, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we've discussed the idea of having a model curriculum quite quite a number of times actually, and there's something that comes quite close to it at undergraduate level, which was developed by CourseSource. There are things like this available, but the thing I would caution against is that your curriculum is going to be different depending on who you're aiming it at. So, for example, Russell runs a molecular life science degree that incorporates a lot of computational biology into it, but it's a molecular life science degree. And so, the elements of the competency framework that are incorporated into that are going to be very, very different from the kinds of things that Bruno would incorporate into his bioinformatics engineering degree. So I think it would be very difficult to create a curriculum that would be a one-size-fits-all, a model curriculum that would be a one-size-fits-all. And that's one of the reasons why we have not done that. But perhaps one way of going down this route, because clearly the demand for this is there. This is a question that we've had asked in many different fora before. Is that we could perhaps think along the lines of what kinds of indicative content could go in a user degree versus a scientist degree versus an engineer's degree. And I think, you know, despite the fact that there are many, many different flavors of user and many different flavors of scientist and many different flavors of engineer, there will be some common themes there. And this is always going to be in indicative content. And so people would have to be encouraged to use this as a theme on which they built their own variations, because we don't have creativity either. I mean, you know, creating a new curriculum is a creative process, and we don't want to stifle that.
Can I just build on that? So is there core competencies for each of the roles and personas that you have, for instance, that could be a starting point for anyone that wants to build a curriculum? At least that is what we hope for the master rubric, that all the 12 KSA should be there in certain ways. And to my knowledge, the competencies is built on the of your KSAs that you have identified. So that is kind of the starting point, building a competence, just a level up, in my view. You have a level up in that, and also more granularity, of course, which both make it good and easy, but also harder on you because you need to update it more often. But I think maybe core could help, because then you get also into a mindset, I guess, that, okay, I start building on these, independent on what I want to build, but these should be always there.
Yeah, there are core competencies, but the levels come into play as well. So, for example, if you're doing a molecular life science degree that has a significant computational biology component, then you would be reaching a higher level in your understanding and application of biological principles.
Yes, of course.
Whereas if you were coming from the engineering direction, of course, that would be that would probably be at the basic knowledge, understanding, comprehension level, and the formal science, the computational science, would be at a much higher level. So it's you know, we already have that little table in the original publication, the 2014 publication, that kind of lists the core competencies in those 3 broad roles. But there's so much nuance to it. I think that's the challenge.
Have they changed the core competencies?
Sorry, I just want to say that we've done this in ISCB Bioinformatics. We actually we had a curriculum workshop for degree programs, and we actually created a set based on all the ISCB ones. We said these should be core, and then we had a list of electives, and this was designed for 2-3 different streams. One is a more data sciencey stream for engineers, one is more sort of the biological stream, and then we also had the electives for they were topic specific, based on where you can then choose this based on the research area of that institution or of that group. So we built that guidelines document. These are available on our website, where we've said these are what we suggest core, and these are what we suggest selective, based on each stream and your research environment.
That's fantastic. And so is there indicative content there as well, Nikki, or is it the...
Yes, I believe there is. I haven't looked at it for a while, but I believe there is. It was done a while ago. Right. So we should probably just update that, but it's sort of the overall modules. And then, yes, for each module, we've got indicative content. But yeah, as I say, they'll probably need to be updated for the new competency framework.
That's absolutely brilliant. So that would be a really great start, Harpreet, and then you could think about, you know, how that would work in your context.
I have a question for Verena in the context of what we talk about at the moment. So you that are familiar with the competencies, are all the core competencies, can they be dealt with in every country, or you need to be a bit different? Thinking of the infrastructure problems maybe that certain countries will have, or the issue, I mean, or it's just maybe creative ways to get around it to anyway learn what you need to learn. Or I'm just thinking out loud here, so it's
Yeah, I mean, Nikki would probably be better placed to provide a response to this than I am. I mean, she's been in the game much longer than I have. But in my personal experience, I feel that a lot of the competencies can be addressed, but it is about just finding the correct mechanism to address it for that particular competency. And then I think also the sort of Bloom's taxonomy also matters a lot then with the competencies, because I mean, many competencies can be addressed at a sort of basic level, I guess. But it's about when when you're going up those levels and you getting to the points of like synthesis and things like that, then that can become a little bit more tricky, especially when it's hardcore coding or programming. I think it can become a bit tricky. But I will allow Nikki to comment on this as well, because she's got a lot more experience with this. But in my experience, it's just about having people that are willing to find creative solutions and having the manpower, I guess, available as well, and the willingness, because I think that it becomes taxing very quickly. And so a lot of people kind of lose their spirit very quickly, but I think it's about having that determination and just pushing through to the end. And oftentimes you learn enough to do it better the next time.
Yeah, I think you've covered it all. Thanks, Verena.
Yeah, to add to that, there are regional country differences, both in terms of input and output. So obviously your students are going to be, depending on your country, they are going to be at a different level in different areas. And the expected output also may vary from a country to the next, depending on the sort of jobs that you're training the students for. And you just need to be aware of that. And that's a reason why having a set
standard set, yes, it doesn't work, right?
Is very difficult. I know in Australia right now, the rage is single cell transcriptomics, okay? So pretty much you need to teach single cell transcriptomics. Otherwise, half your students won't be able to get jobs when they graduate, because that's what everybody wants to hire.
Yeah, at the moment, yes, in 5 years.
At the moment, that's correct. But really, ultimately, what you want to teach is transferable skills, which is when the next wave, the next buzzword comes along, they're ready to.
So the creativity, the critical thinking, to have that in, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the sort of things that really the competencies are focusing on. They are deliberately not specific in that term, because what is really aimed for is general transferable skills that give the students the ability to learn and to grow with the field.
Yeah, and I think this is something that both the mastery rubric and the framework really have in common, actually, because you mentioned about the first two KSAs, Jessica, and those those being kind of less granular than the others. I think we have exactly this.
Yes, exactly. You are more granular. I mean, I can fit the competences under all of these, as well as the competences are built on KSAs. So yeah,
we have to allow the freedom for multiple rapidly evolving specializations, and so we've tried to build that in.
Have you met, because that is one of the mind kind of, not scariness, but the thing of, have you met people, if you can't if I can't map on your competencies because I feel I don't fit into the persona, like Rosso said, it could be a new persona, right? Or I don't fit. Is it, are people turned off then, or are they people more creative and then, okay, but if I take that and mix with that and I can create my own things?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the possibility to create your own persona, and in fact, there's a set of tools that we're building that enable you to do that. You could create your own personal profile and compare that with the personas that already exist, and see where the gaps are. And so you could actually use that two different ways. One is as an individual to essentially give yourself a shopping list of training that you need to go on, or of new competencies that you need to develop. It might not all be through training, of course. Some of it might just be from learning on the job. Or you could do it to think, well, actually, you know, I'm not the only person that fits my profile. Perhaps there is a new role, a new profession evolving, and that could actually be used to, you know, to guide us incorporating further roles into the what you know, what, like just like the mastery rubric, it's becoming a multi-dimensional thing. You've got
No, but that's really good, because then you also take, I mean, not advantage, but it's a win-win, that if you get the community to help you also to be aware, raise awareness about new things, because we are only us, and we can't see everything. So that is really good. I have a question regarding why you have chosen attitudes and not something else, because just to me, when you show that with the effective attitude, effective behavior, and ineffective, if you say to me that what was it, that you have a restricted view on the world, or you're, I can argue that I think you're wrong. I think I have. I think I am inclusive.
Yeah, these are guidelines for the individual, and yes, of course, how you interpret that depends on your individual personality. But I think, you know, we incorporated them because, at least for a subset of the community, they're very, very illustrative in terms of what you might not quite be doing right yet, and what might be holding you back career-wise.
So soft skills and more behavioral aspects, yeah.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, some of this has also come about this way because of the history that the group working on this has also had, and you know, myself personally, I've worked on other competency frameworks in other projects, some of which have been more along the lines of kind of organizational competency frameworks, where the attitudinal things, the behavioral things are right at the forefront, you know, getting the values right, the context in which you work. And as we work more and more with users of bioinformatics, I think this becomes absolutely critical.
No, I totally see the point. And I think that sometimes maybe many research and bioinformatics are too eager to put measurements on everything, but maybe not all can't be measured. I mean, it's not good also to put everything into a metric in that sense. So I totally agree. And also having behaviors also start a more discussion, being more that you then grow your views or grow your mindset. So if I disagree with you, and when you say that I have a narrow view or whatever, we can start a discussion on that, and maybe we both will learn, instead of having a harsh kind of, okay, this is the measurement. So I think that it's good. It's nothing bad. It's just two different ways. Absolutely. And both are needed. Definitely.
And you can swap terms in and out as well. You know, you call them attitude. What's the difference between an attitude and a behavior? You can,
Yeah, those two are the same. It's more that if you have it as an ability, as the master rubric then it's a measured thing. But a measured thing might not always be good. Sometimes yes, but for especially for maybe the communication, or for the soft core that you should have brought with you anyway, the core values of yourself. Who to say that I'm more right than you are, or vice versa.
Yeah, and also, you know, if we start to raise awareness of these things the university level. So, you know, if these things become incorporated into undergraduate courses, then the possibility to develop well-rounded professionals at an earlier stage is enhanced, I think.
I'm thinking back, as you know, one of the joys of my job is I get to write references for my students. And the questions that potential employers ask are very rarely about skills. They are always about attitudes and behaviors.
Is it because they think that they expect the skills and knowledge to be there since they come from this program?
Yeah. If they graduate, they've got the skills.
Yeah.
So what they want to know is, you know, the attitudes and the behaviors.
No, that's fine. I mean,
at many a recruitment interview, you know, we've had two very strong candidates. One of them isn't quite the fully formed article in terms of their skills, but you can tell by their demeanor, by their the way they answer the questions, by their approach, that they have the right attitudinal set to catch up very, very quickly. And so on paper, they might not look quite so good, but once you get them to interview and start to get to know them as a person, you realize that actually they might not look quite so good on paper, but they're the right person for this role.
Could that be a cultural difference as well? Sorry, Bruno. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, no, go ahead, Jessica, but I think we need to move the discussion on.
Oh, sorry. Yes, no. Then.
Because we're already 15 minutes past the schedule for the breakout room.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I think there's so much fun talking to you.
No, this is brilliant. And there was one question on the Discord chat about FAIR principles. And the question specifically is there anything that you, and that question was for you, Kath, actually, are doing to reach out to countries where English is not widely spoken? Yes. Which is an interesting point, but FAIR. I mean, even the acronym FAIR is an English word. You know, how well does that translate to other cultures and to other languages?
Yes, in Latin America, in the Cabana project, we're actually doing a lot on that. So we've started to run some training courses, and particularly our Train the Trainer courses in Spanish and Portuguese. And they've been very successful, and especially in reaching out to more remote regions. We also, at the EBI, we have an e-learning resource called Train Online. And we simply enabled Google Translate in Train Online. So you can choose what language you want to do the courses in. And of course, it's not perfect, but it makes it more inclusive than it was previously. And so, you know, the huge caveat there is that it's not going to be like doing the course in your native language, but it's at least going to enable you to worry about one less thing. If you're trying to grapple with a whole new skill set and a language that you don't feel very comfortable with in the same time, that can just be too much of a barrier. We have had many lengthy discussions about the language question, because we can't get away from the fact that English is the international language of science. And so if you're going to go down the research career route, then I do think it's important to get up to scratch with English language. But I've mentioned many times this afternoon that users of bioinformatics are an increasingly important audience for this community. And of course, users of bioinformatics don't need to have high-level English skills. If you're a physician working in your local hospital, or if you're an agronomist working with farmers, then you will conduct all of your business in your local language. And so I do think this is an increasingly important challenge that we need to tackle in our learning materials. Fortunately, the likes of Google are helping us enormously, because they do a lot of the natural language processing for us.
So before we move to the next phase, are there any last questions from the group here for the panel on any of the talks, or on bioinformatics education and training in general? If not, I guess we can move to the next phase, and I'll ask Kath to introduce what comes next.
Okay, thank you very much, Bruno. So we're going to run this a little bit differently from how I'd originally anticipated. We've got a little bit less time, and I think we have sufficiently few people that we could probably do this in plenary, actually. So rather than breaking out into separate groups, I think we can all stay together. I have put a link in the chat channel, which I hope you all have access to, which is the guidelines for the breakout. And basically, I'm just going to quickly walk you through, and then we can do a couple of examples together. So basically, the purpose of this is to give you a flavor of how to use the ISCB Competency Framework to
do everyone see it? Does everyone have access to the link, or should you share the screen? I'm just thinking. Then, yeah.
Is that better? No, hang on. I'm not seeing the green line around my. Can you see it?
Yes.
No. Okay. Good.
Yes.
Right. So yeah. So the goal is to enable you to either design a course or redesign a pre-existing course to meet the learning objectives of a specific target audience. And what I'm not going to touch on is something that Jessica touched on earlier, and I think is actually really important, and that this activity assumes that you have a decent set of learning objectives or of learning outcomes. I am wondering whether something we might do in a future session is a session on how to write good learning outcomes, because Jessica really hit the nail on the head. This is the this is the crux of making all of this work. If your outcomes are not well written, then you're not going to be able to achieve any of this. So maybe that's for InCoB next year. Or maybe we could do something at the Education Summit on writing learning outcomes. That would be fun. Okay, so what we were going to be doing, and I'm going to compress this in the interest of time, is to run through a couple of little examples. One of which is a short course, and one of which is it's not a full curriculum. It's a specialization that has, I think, 7 modules in it, and we can have a go at 2 different types of mapping. If you have your own courses that you would like to map, you are very welcome to do this in your own time. You've got the link to this document. There are all these templates are actually identical. I just didn't want people to overwrite. So we could click in any of these links, and you'll have access to the same document. I'm just going to click in room 1. And there are many different ways to map to the framework, but there are 2 ways that we found are quite helpful. And one of those is around, essentially, this is probably the way that best parallels Jessica's talk and how the mastery rubric is used, because this is thinking about what competencies does someone need to actually be able to benefit from the course in the first place. So what level of competency are they coming into your course with, and then what levels do you expect them to come out of the course with? And then if you have a course curriculum, you can objectively think about, well, are they reaching the target level? And if not, is there a part of the course that I need to redesign? So that's one way of mapping a course. And the example that I've provided for that is an example from the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics. It's a short course. I think it's just a 5-day course on statistics and machine learning. So we can have a go at that in a minute. And then I've also provided a sort of gap analysis example. And this is the kind of mapping that I alluded to in my talk, and that Bruno performed on his bioinformatics engineering course when we first started working on the competency framework. And so the idea with this type of mapping is that you've got either your courses or your modules, your entire curriculum mapped out as columns along the top here. You've got the competencies as rows. And you simply go along and say, well, you know, does this module address the competency at all? If it does, is it the main focus of the competency of the course, or is this competency the main focus of the course, or is it something that they learn almost incidentally by doing this module? Or is the competency the main focus of the course? And so you give a score according to which of these criteria best fits for that module and that competency. And you go through and fill out the entire grid. And then, of course, where there are zeros, you need to have a think about how you redesign your course. And where there are ones, you might be fine. You might be able to leave things exactly as they are, but just make sure that all of the competencies are covered. Or you might want to think, if there are lots and lots of ones and no twos, you might want to think about how you reconfigure your modules so that the logic of the modules fits the competency requirements a little bit more tightly. But you could achieve the same goal with either of those approaches, and this is why we have not provided indicative content for a standard curriculum, because either of those methods would work. So I'm going to suggest that we have a go at this. Well, actually, let's have a show of hands. How many of you are involved in teaching on full-length degree courses? Those of you who don't have your pictures.
I have been.
Yeah, so, okay. And how many of you are more involved in short courses, standalones? Okay, so it's probably, yeah, I'm getting a lot of non-responses here, and I'm not sure whether that's because people are online but not there, or just because they're being very quiet.
We can use the reactions if it's easier, if people are not having the video.
Yeah, well, that's
or that is what you're doing, or maybe.
That's what I was hoping for. A couple of user reactions.
Yeah, Kat, I think I can help you a little bit. So we have Zati. Zati is on a full degree.
Yes.
We have Song Fei Kang is also in full degree. So Harpreet is also in full degree.
Let's do full.
Yes.
One Rosalina, are you still there? One Rosalina, I think she's also on full degree. Muhammad Firdaus is also in full degree. Myself is also in full degree. I think we could go into full degree.
Let's do a full. Well, this isn't a full degree. It's a specialization, but it's the same kind of process. So I plucked a course. I didn't quite pluck this out of the air. We had a very nice introduction to this course at an ISMB meeting a couple of years ago. This is it's a freely available Coursera specialization in bioinformatics, which has 7 modules to it. And obviously we're not going to get through all of the modules. So I think basically, let's just start with the first module.
If I could say a quick thing there.
Yeah,
the advantage of doing this gap mapping, and which is probably less obvious when you look at the specialization, is when you're working on a full degree, as opposed to the Coursera specialization, you do not have control over everything.
Yeah.
And everybody who's teaching a full degree knows, if you're going to teach math, you're not going to teach math yourself.
Yes.
You're going to go to the math schools. So what that allows you to do is to identify the areas where you can modify what you have control over, which typically will be the bioinformatics courses.
Yes. Okay. We're kind of simulating this because I've plucked a course that none of us is involved in. So we don't have control over this. Now, okay, so we don't have much time, so I don't want to go into this in vast amounts of detail. But we do have a syllabus here. Actually, this is not very helpful. Show more.
Can I comment on one thing before? So you talked about this with or let's see what you called it. You had in the so in the curricula that you have a kind of suggested curricula and what is happening curricula, and then kind of what is attained curricula could be quite different. I think it's good to raise awareness of that what you as a teacher think would be the outcome might not be the outcome in the end. You had that in your Excel sheet that actual bloom levels reached. Yeah. So there is what Kat also I think is mentioning with that the learning outcomes is really important, because that helps you to make sure that your suggested or planned curricula is what is also attained curricula at as much as possible.
That's right, and you can do that. Like, the reason why I've set this out this way is because you're, if you've set a bunch of prerequisites for your course, then that is obviously going to be able to tell you or give you some indication of what level is required by the trainees coming in, and then the learning outcomes should tell you that the verbs that are used in the learning outcomes should tell you what level the competency is what level of competency should be reached. So actually looking at looking at the content in the full degree makes me think it might be rather impractical to do that, partly because of the screen sharing challenge and partly because the content in the modules is not terribly instructive. So I'm wondering whether our time might not be better spent just running through this very simple example and thinking about, you know, can we grab the prerequisite Bloom's levels out of the prerequisites for this course, and can we grab the intended outcomes out of the information we've got here. So let's have a go at that. All right, so this is so we could think of this as being one module of a degree course, if you like. So it's life scientists who are already familiar with Python programming. So they have a basic knowledge of that, and they have a basic knowledge of statistics. So if I was to run down the competencies, we've got an H3 here, which is make appropriate and efficient use of scripting and programming languages. So, oh, and the one thing I forgot to mention is that I've also provided the Bloom's taxonomy in this spreadsheet. So you've got all of the Bloom's terms from knowledge to evaluation, and some of the illustrative verbs that pertain to that level. So if knowledge is essentially level 1, your prerequisite for scripting and programming is 1. And then there's a mention of statistics, which should be in here. We've got use data science methods suitable for the size and complexity of the data here. Basic knowledge in statistics, so I would put a 1 in there as well. By the end of the course, we would expect them to have got beyond a 1 on this data science competency, because we're expecting that they would be able to perform linear and logistic regressions and critically evaluate their results. So, looking at the Bloom's levels, where do you think we should be? What's our intended level at the end of the course?
Probably 4 or 5. Analysis.
I would say that it's a bit high, but maybe not.
Application.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
It's 4 or 5, yeah. Most probably 5, number 5.
The highest Bloom is 6, right?
Yeah, I was thinking more in this area of, you're definitely going to be able to apply as a minimum.
Analysis then.
Analysis, yes. In a 5-day course, I'd be surprised if you got up to this level, actually.
Cognitive speaking, it's quite hard to go for more than one level of Bloom's in a short format course. That is more or less impossible, just to say. And thinking of here is where you also need, when you do these kind of exercises, I think it's hard in the sense that I'm thinking of this only knowledge or skill, depending on what you're looking at. But you need to see the whole context, right? To keep that in mind, and that is a bit tricky sometimes.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. But just as a regular thing, you probably never go more than 1 Bloom level.
Yeah. So and that you know, if you were actually teaching on this course, that might be your experience, that people are not getting up there. So that might indicate one of two problems. One is that you've written your learning outcomes in such a way that they might not be realistic. Or what you might need to do is say, actually, you need more than a basic knowledge.
Yes, exactly. You need, the prerequisite is higher than you expected from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how you might use this. You can either lower your sights and shift down the level of the course, or you can tighten up your course prerequisites and say, well, actually, you know, somebody coming on this course needs to have demonstrated to me that they've got a higher level of statistics in the first place. And so you might want to give them some prior learning, and actually if we go to the ISCB website, they do a great job of this. They have a here we go. They have some access to free courses in statistics, and then you can test yourself to make sure that you're at the prerequisite level.
And that's part of the assessment, right? Just if that is a word that it's not, it's a jargon that can be hard, but that you assess prior, assess under, assess after. Yeah. Really good.
Yeah, I actually have a question that I would like to ask. Kath, can you go back to the mapping? Yeah, no, this is not the other one. So when we fill up this mapping, am I supposed to fill up as an educator or as a student or as a learner?
So you would be filling this. This is a tool for the educator. So you would be filling this out as the educator, but you might be using data from your learners. So
to get this. So for column number E, since we need to look at we need to monitor and see whether a student actually achieved this particular Bloom's level, is it safe to say that we could only do this at least after 1 or 2 cycles of running it?
Possibly yes.
Yeah, because I just wanted to understand, because say like I'm already managing a course now. So if I intend to get a ISCB map and whatever, so I just need to check whether should I run this program first or should I wait and things like that.
Yeah, and actually one of the questions when you apply for affiliation of a course is around whether you've led the course before, because it does help to have that experience and to have that prior feedback from your learners. But if you're designing a program completely from scratch, then you won't have these data. And so then, you know, the pearl of wisdom that Jessica's just given us, that it's very, very difficult to go up more than one level in a short standalone course, is helpful, because then that, you know, that makes you have a really good think about whether you're being realistic here, and you can modify accordingly. Okay, so are there any other competencies that are relevant to this particular course? I mean, this is a short course, so I probably wouldn't expect it to map to more than a couple of competencies.
So what's the difference between the Bloom's mapping example with the Bloom's mapping template with gap analysis example and gap analysis template?
Yeah, so this was an example that I mean, initially I was just going to do this quickly in the intro, and then in the breakouts I was going to ask people to use the blank template. And please do, you've all got edit access to these templates now, so just, you know, grab a copy of them, and then you can you can do your own course using either of these templates. But as I say, you know, this is good for either a short course or a single module of a degree. The gap analysis one is more designed for an entire curriculum to see where you're missing out. And so, I mean, we might be able to do something very, very quick and dirty here, just from the titles of the courses. So finding hidden messages in DNA is basically biology. So
can we go for B3, prepare life science data for computational analysis?
But yeah, it's hard to do this without having the indicative content of the module in front of us. But I would say yes, this one certainly, I would say, would be a 2. That one, depending on the content, possibly more of a 1. I mean, the genome sequencing module here is about is about the sequencing pipeline, you know, generating the data and then processing the data. So by the time you completed that, yeah, I mean, it's bang on focus for preparing life science data for computational analysis. Whereas this is more about the knowledge base behind that. So I'd say that's probably more of a 2 up there and a 1 there. But again, it's you know, this is more guesswork because we don't have the syllabus right in front of us.
Yeah, this course of specialization is actually very computer science.
Yes. Yes.
It's puzzles.
Yeah. I mean, it's aimed at people who have no biology.
Yeah, exactly. It's well, it's in a way, it's to try to motivate people interested in biology to learn computer science. That's what that course is about. Like finding hidden messages in DNA is the title of the chapter, but in fact, what you study in that chapter is computer science techniques for string searching.
Ah, right.
You know, same thing, comparing genes, proteins, and genomes. It motivates it with there, but what you actually go and study when you do that is dynamic programming and sequence alignment. Right. So it's actually, a lot of it is about you know, motivating people interested in biology and bringing them to understand computer science.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so then we've got a lot of this then is making appropriate and efficient use of scripting and programming languages. And I'm guessing at some point it's going to get into I3 as well.
That's going to be for the big data in biology one, is when it's really the course goes to and same thing, like 5 and 7 are the ones that are about more infrastructure and so on.
Yes, yeah. Yes, so your data science is up here, isn't it? Yeah. So there, that would be there. Yeah. But what I don't know, because I haven't studied the syllabus very carefully, but my hunch is that if you were to comprehensively do this and sort of check the syllabus against every competency and you know, check every module of it against every competency, that you'll certainly have a few 1s in here, and you might have some 0s, and my hunch is that the 0s might be down here at the kind of team working level. So I mean, it's fine, because this, you know, this isn't a a degree awarding qualification, but if you were awarding an undergraduate or a postgraduate degree in bioinformatics or in a bioinformatics related science, you would want to try and get some of this in here, because otherwise your graduates are going to struggle to find positions for all the reasons that Bruno was alluding to earlier.
Yeah, no, this
Yep,
course is,
and yeah, a lot of them actually involved with the delivery method as well. And I guess since we are mainly looking at curriculum, and there's no way we would see the delivery method unless this is an online thing. But I guess probably us, I mean, like myself, I'm an academician, and I totally have has access to knowing the delivery method. So I guess doing the mapping would be easier from my side.
It's a lot easier doing it for your own course, because
That's right.
you know how it's delivered. But yeah, I thought to create a completely level playing field, I was going to grab something that none of us knew much about.
This particular course, because it's run online, so M3 is obviously like you could put 1 across the bottom row. Yeah. Because every course is run online and people have to be self-motivated to do it.
Yes. Well, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
You know, but at the same time, L3, because you do it by yourself, all the courses get 0. Yeah. And J3, you actually don't touch into it as well, you know. The scripting and programming languages, most of them, like every chapter, every course has programming assignments. Yeah. So almost every one of them would be 1s.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but can I understand like the whole thing? So say like we fill up this thing, and then are we supposed to have like a benchmark? For example, if this is an undergraduate, so we are supposed to get like say like 70% of it to be 1. So if this is a postgraduate, are we supposed to be receiving like 80% of 2? You know, how is that going to be like?
So do you want to address that, Kath? Or?
Well, why don't you address it, Bruno, because you have done this.
Yeah, so the way you use this is you've got the competencies, and once you've filled up the matrix, you just add it. Okay, so you add the value across each row for each competency, and you get a number. Okay, and that it really is a tool for reflection at that stage, because you know what your course is about, what your degree program is about, and what you aim to deliver at the end. So you may not, you know, if your program, like mine, you know, is about delivering engineers, I know, you know, the totals at the end there, you know, it is, the technical ones are quite high, you know, whereas the biology one is a bit lighter. I mean, ideally, you do want to have an even spread, but you're not going to get an even spread. And what distribution of number you get now should really be lined up with your degree learning objectives. So this is where you align your degree learning objectives with the competencies. So that's a two-way process. That's you do ideally want to cover everything, but you know that your degree is not going to cover everything in the same to the same level. So at that level, then you need to think about what is it that you expect your graduates to be, and which level they are. Obviously, like, you know, when if you're looking at a longitudinal thing, like, you know, like the master rubric, you know, at a PhD level, you expect higher numbers than at the undergraduate level. But it's really about your degree objectives at that stage, and how they correlate with those competencies. It's a tool for reflection. It's a way to see where the gaps are, and then that prompts you to reflect, well, do I need to teach more in this area? Do my students need to know more about it? are they in some way unbalanced?
Yep, I understand, Bruno. I think that is great. Is very good for reflection. But at the same time, I'm just thinking, is there like a score like we should achieve? Say like if it's an undergraduate, it should be around, in this range. If you're at postgraduate, it should be at that range. Would it?
Not
Do you
in
have
this
such?
mapping. Not in this mapping, because you're not saying anything about the Bloom's level here. You're just
Yeah.
saying, which modules don't address the competency, which ones do, but in a kind of round the houses way, and which ones are really focused on that competency. If you did the Bloom's mapping for every module and then added that up, then yes, you would expect you'd expect the score to be higher at a postgraduate level than you would at an undergraduate level. But there's a caveat to that as well, because it depends on the specialism that you're going into. And if you're becoming much more specialized in algorithms, let's say, then actually you're probably losing some of the other stuff. So that there's no magic number is the short answer.
I can tell you, like, this is the gap analysis is a very rough tool, because like this mapping 0, 1, 2, it's extremely crude.
Yeah.
Okay, it's really a tool for reflection. If you want to get to more detail, more granularity, what I actually do, and what we try to do at the university level, because when we go for accreditation, what we do is we take each course has got learning outcomes. And then each learning outcome is mapped to assessment. So your assessment should be mapped to learning outcome. And each assessment has a certain weight, so an exam may be worth 40%, an assignment may be worth 20%, and so on. So there you can get some much more concrete numbers if you're willing to do the work. So what you do is you map the competencies to the learning outcomes. You map the learning outcomes to the assessment, and then you add up the weight of the assessment associated with those learning outcomes. If you've done this mapping right, then you end up with really a measure which is a lot more accurate here for the various things. But it's still
it's a major piece of work, isn't it?
It's a lot of work. We do that for accreditation because we need to do it once every 5 years when our degrees get accredited. We don't like doing it, to tell you. My colleagues have developed computer software to do it.
Yeah.
And now every time we have to submit a new course or a course revision, we have to do this full mapping so that that process can be done more easily down the line.
Yes. Yeah.
But once done, it must be quite a good kind of framework and something to lean on. So.
Yeah, and as the field changes, you can see where your gaps are. Sorry.
Yep, I think this is great and it's truly a good reflection. I have one very practical question. Russell did mention that ISCB, is actually on the way of doing the stamping to say that, oh, this is certified and things like that. So the practical question is there any cost involved?
For that, it's going to be, the idea is it'll be a nominal cost of $100 to apply. And that's simply to ensure that people are serious about applying. Because the review process itself is quite time consuming and is done by volunteers. And so it's to stop frivolous applications and partial applications and those kinds of things. So that's the only reason why we're going to charge.
Well, there's also an administrative cost, in managing the program.
Yes.
And as ISCB treasurer, that cost must be recouped.
Yes, absolutely. But there is, of course, a cost to you in terms of time doing the mapping. But the mapping is a more lightweight version of what Bruno's just described. And Seth at the ISCB is providing the means to do it in the application form. So it's, you know, the forms help you rather than hinder you in terms of doing the mapping. As you might.
We understand. It's not an easy word, really not easy at all.
It is all taking a lot of time. I mean, you know, just getting to the point where we felt comfortable as a professional body saying, yes, we're at the point where we can actually do this has been quite a long journey. Anyway, I'm looking at the time and thinking, I really hope that this has been a useful exercise to get you on the start of the journey. As is often the case with these things, there are no really simple answers, and Bruno hit the nail on the head. This is something that will help you in self-reflection. It might help you identify gaps in your curriculum, or it might help you to realize that actually the core target audience for my course is X, and if I remarket this course in this way, it's perfectly good. I've just been targeting the wrong people. So it might be that curriculum wise you don't have to do much at all. But you've got the tools to have a play around, and please do grab them, have a play around with your own programs. I would love to get some feedback from you. Let me know how easy or otherwise it is to do this and what you've learned from it. And do let us know if you'd like to participate in the Education Summit next year, and we'll make sure that as soon as we've nailed it, we let you know.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kath. Thank you very much. Yes, the time is 5 p.m. now in Singapore, so we have to end this workshop. But I really have to say, this is really, really great. So for a lot of us, I think for participants who are still, who are still here, a lot of them who are also academics in their own university. So thank you very, very much for being here. I echo with you, Harpreet. I also think that this is so useful and this is so great. I'm also in the midst of doing some accreditation exercises. It's headache. This is great. The mapping is great, and yeah, we'll definitely will feedback to you, Kath, whether is there any way that we could improve on our curriculum. So yeah, Kang also mentioned that he find the content very useful. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all of the speakers here, to Jessica, to Kath, to Bruno, to Nikki, if you're still here, to Verena, and also to all of the participants here. Thank you very, very much for your time. We have spent a very fruitful 4 hours together to discuss on issue related to education. Hi, Nikki, you're still here. Thank you so much again for being here. We really look forward that we're going to see everyone again, hopefully in the next Education Summit. Of course, AP Bionet is also very much into it. So if you're very, very much interested, please contact us, or maybe you can contact the speakers right away to show your interest. So before we end this session, I just want to ask everyone here, any other words? I do not want to say last word, but any other remarks?
Question. In terms of the slides, shall we just send you slides, Waikeet, and can you make them available to the participants?
Sure, no problem. Please. Yeah, all good. Send to me. I'll send it to the committee, the tech committee, and then we will disseminate. Thank you so much. Great.
And thank you for organizing. It's been
yes. Thank you.
Thank you.